And we resume with Treasury, Small Business, Housing, Corporate and Law Group, and I'll go to Senator Bragg.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I just want to get to the bottom of the round one of the HAFF tender. You know about this?
Yes, sir.
So there was a media release in September from the Prime Minister and the Housing Minister.
That's right.
So did that come through the department, your area?
I'll just check with my team if we were involved in drafting it. Yeah. Yes, it did.
Okay, did you know in this media release that it said in the name of the Prime Minister and the Housing Minister that Housing Australia has recommended contract negotiations for 185 projects, with construction on almost 40% of the 13,742 dwellings forecast to get underway this financial year?
Yes, we're aware of that, Senator.
Okay. And then you know then that at the last estimates, which I think was in November, you were here and it was made known that there'd been one contract signed at that stage. Subsequent to that, I think in January or maybe early February, there was another release from the Minister saying that there'd now been more contracts signed. I think from memory, maybe it was 12?
I believe it was...
That's correct.
12 contracts, yeah. Okay, that's good. And that covered about 800 houses. Is that right?
Yes.
And this is round one of the HAFF. So the HAFF hasn't financed any other housing so far. This is round one.
So Senator,
is that right?
Felix Donovan, Assistant Secretary Housing Division, that was correct as at the 31st of January when that announcement was made. There have been more contracts signed since that point. So
how many now?
So we are just over 20 contracts for more than 1,800 homes.
Okay, so it's gone from announcement in September of 13,000 houses, one contract signed as at November, 12 as at January for 800 houses, and now 20 contracts signed for over 1,000.
1,000, more than 1,800.
Almost 2,000, okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. And how many of those contracts have resulted in building houses so far?
So, Senator, those projects are broadly up to 3 different points. All of those homes, you could divide them into 3 categories.
Yep.
One is homes that are already built, were acquired and are now operational. So the first HAFF homes are tenanted now. There are people living in new social and affordable homes that the HAFF has made available.
So they've acquired them? Because there's no way that since the contract was signed, they've built houses. You can't build a house. The average time to build a house is about 10 or 11 months.
Yes.
So they haven't built houses, have they?
So those houses that are the new social and affordable homes that are operational are likely to be acquisitions. Exact sort of project level details are questions best put to Housing Australia.
Okay.
But our understanding is that those are likely to have been acquisitions.
So the HAFF has acquired houses that were already in existence. They were built by someone else.
So the HAFF has supported CHPs and other proponents to bring online new social and affordable housing.
Yep.
That is mostly through building new houses as a result of funding that's flown.
How many of those been built so far?
How many houses have been built? So, sorry.
If you have the answers. I was just going to say the detailed questions about the HAFF should really go to Housing Australia later. But, I mean, sorry, Mr. Donovan, we can be as helpful as we can, but the detail for the witnesses will be for later today.
So I think the official has just said that of the houses that people are living in now, the HAFF houses, they were acquired.
So just to clarify my evidence, what I said was that under the HAFF, both acquisitions and new constructions are supported. The project level information would be available from Housing Australia. Of the 1,800 homes contracted so far, there would be a mix of homes currently under construction, to be constructed, and already constructed and acquired.
But the point is that HAFF is not just building new houses, and the HAFF program is not about just building new houses. It's also about acquiring existing houses, isn't it?
Acquiring houses is allowable under the HAFF arrangements, mean, the focus is on, in the longer term, is on building new dwellings, but we don't apologise for trying to increase the range of social and affordable housing product across the economy. I mean, that's an important part of why the HAFF was established, and I know it hasn't been the focus of the Liberal Party, social and affordable housing, but we think it's an important component of alleviating pressure in the housing market for those that find paying rent at market rates difficult.
Okay, so I guess my question is, of the 320 houses that are referred to in the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age today, how many of those houses, 358, sorry, how many of those houses were built and how many were acquired?
Senator, I would recommend putting that question to Housing Australia, who have the latest information on project-specific.
Okay. Well, if contracts have been signed for less than 2,000 houses, then we'd assume that most of them were acquired.
It's through Housing Australia. It's the area that you should direct that. We are trying to be as helpful as we can. And
I suspect that the HAFF hasn't built any houses yet so far. Would you be confident in agreeing with me, Minister?
Well, I'm pleased that there are 340 odd new houses that are allowing tenants, real people, to live in more affordable housing. That is part of this government's focus. I know you dismiss it, but for those people who would have moved in and are tenants of those properties, I would imagine it's making a real difference.
Yeah, but they've been acquired. We'll ask Housing Australia, but it sounds like the HAFF hasn't yet actually built a house. It's been acquiring houses that already existed in the market, that were already built.
That's allowable under the HAFF arrangements.
Fine, but that's not what it says in the paper today.
And after you delayed it for 18 months in the Senate, to sit here and point the finger and say it's not happening fast enough is a bit rich, frankly.
Well, we know
it was you and the Greens teaming up not to allow the passage of that legislation. As soon as it's passed, we've got cracking, and now we're seeing new product enter the housing market.
How many?
For social and affordable. Well, we've already talked about the ones that are complete with tenants in them, and we have thousands under contract. We have thousands.
You're displacing the market
thousands more
by buying,
than you would have.
You're buying houses that already existed.
You're going to abolish it.
Okay.
I mean, I don't even know why you ask any questions, because it's something you don't support. You've sought to delay, and you're going to abolish if you win the election.
Well, because these are matters of great public interest. You spent $10 billion to buy 300 houses that already existed.
No, that is not true. You're misrepresenting
$10 billion for 300 houses that already existed.
It is a fund of
$10
billion that has a capital outlay, an annual capital injection into the housing market each year.
This has been a disaster.
It has not.
This is a boondoggle.
Oh.
It is. You know it is.
Yeah, well, go. Why don't you?
That's why the minister's so desperately putting all this stuff into the media today.
Here we go. Why don't we arrange for you to go and meet one of the tenants in the new house, and you can say that to them?
I'm on building sites
Do you think you'd be as brave then? Do you think you'd call them a boondoggle to their face, the tenants in those houses?
This fund hasn't built any houses.
Yeah.
You're embarrassed.
So I don't imagine you will.
I'm embarrassed for you.
You talk tough in Canberra in a committee room. Would you go and meet any of those tenants?
How many building sites have you been on in the last few weeks?
I doubt it very much. You tell them you're about to abolish the housing that's been provided to them. You tell them you think
most people don't live in a house owned by the government. I know it's shocking to believe in Canberra. I know you live in Canberra. It's a bit of a distorted world.
I look forward to seeing you do that.
Well,
See how
I'll do it with you.
tough talk in the committee room translates to a tenant that's enjoying social and
I'd be happy to go with you.
Senator Bragg, how are you going for time?
I'm inviting the minister to accompany me to this meeting.
Well, I'd be happy. I would film it. I would film you saying that it's a boondoggle to them.
We'll go together.
And that they don't deserve it.
We'll go together.
Okay.
I look forward to that. Now, I want to ask you also about what the Treasury's role has been in the HAFF tender. Have you had any role in this tender process?
So, Senator, I'll start and pass to the team. Treasury is responsible for advising the Minister around the policy settings of the HAFF, so including the investment mandate, all of those sorts of processes, but the HAFF itself is administered by Housing Australia completely.
So you have nothing to do with that?
I didn't say we had nothing to do with it. I've explained that we're involved at the policy development end and in terms of supporting the Minister to provide instruction to Housing Australia on how the program should be run.
Okay. What sort of... let's talk about the houses in the pipeline, because when I asked Minister Wong about this in the Senate 2 weeks ago, she made the point that there were lots of houses in the pipeline. And I think I made the point you can't live in a pipeline. But for those houses that are in the pipeline, what sort of approval process do they go through when they're commissioned? These judgments, are they made just by Housing Australia's board, or do they go through a cabinet process?
So again, I'll pass to the team, but Senator, I think we're conflating quite a few different things. Some of the numbers that you've heard relate to a range of different programs. So are you talking solely about the HAFF?
Just the HAFF?
Yeah.
The 13,000?
Yes. So...
Housing Australia's board, they make...
They make the decisions. They are the accountable authority for Housing Australia.
Okay.
But obviously they do that in line with the investment mandate that's been provided by government about the program. And the Cabinet is involved at relevant points in deciding relevant elements of that investment mandate before it's passed on to Housing Australia. But the actual decision making is undertaken by the Housing Australia board.
And what about availability payments? Is that something that you can talk about?
Well, that's part of the HAFF, so it's one of the options, the funding options that people have available through the HAFF.
All right. What about, so those questions, so the questions about the tender process, the judgments that they make, the availability payments, they all go to the Housing Australia?
If it's part of the HAFF decision making, I should also point out that the HAFF is a fund in of itself. Other disbursements are made from the HAFF that don't go for the purposes of this program that Housing Australia runs. So if you're talking about the delivery of the Housing Australia Future Fund projects, then that is all of the options for funding under that program are determined in line with the investment mandate by the board.
Sounds like we'll have to explore that with them. So look, on Help to Buy, what's the start date of the scheme?
I'll just pass to Mr Donovan.
Senator, we're expecting the scheme to start later this year. It will in part depend on final decisions and the registration of program directions, and then Housing Australia will move to implementation, and funding will be available from the 1st of July 2025 to enable that implementation.
So it starts on 1 July 25?
So we'll start in the 25-26 financial year, yes.
Okay. And what are the annualised costs of the scheme over that period?
So, Senator, the costs of the scheme are probably best understood in two different ways. One is the equity investments that the government is making. The total quantum of that is $5.5 billion. And then there are the departmental costs and other administered costs, so public debt interest costs as a result of being able to make those equity investments. And that funding was first included in the October 2022 budget, which we have. So we can provide that in those budget statements. It was said that it was $324.6 million over 4 years to establish the scheme.
324?
324.6.
Over 4?
Over 4 years.
Okay. And which lenders have signed up to the scheme?
So lenders would sign up to the scheme once Housing Australia is further along the implementation of the scheme and following the registration of program directions.
Where does the equity investment of $5.5 billion sit in the current budget estimates?
So, Senator, the $5.5 billion in equity is included in the budget, but not as a kind of individualised, itemised line item. So I can point you to where it is in the budget financial statements as at MyEFO last year, if that's useful.
Yeah. So in which year?
So if we're looking at MyEFO 24-25, on page 146, Part 7, Australian Government Budget Financial Statements, it's under the category of financial assets, included in the line item advances paid. It's not separately itemised there, because that would occur and it would come out as a separate line item once the program directions for the scheme have been registered.
But until then, it sits there as an aggregated figure.
That's right.
Why?
Because it is still subject to the final decisions that will impact the final estimated equity investment before it comes out as a line item. All of that is quite standard practice with these types of investments, because some of the important program parameters are contained in the program directions, which were first consulted on last year, will be finalised and registered in the coming months.
What's the assumed return on equity?
So the return on equity is over, as you would imagine, quite a number of decades. So there is not an assumed return within the forward estimates period. And the total return is over a series of decades. I don't have the specific figures on that with me here today, so if we would need to probably take that on notice, Senator.
I think the Housing Australia website says that the Help to Buy will commence once program directions are in force.
Yes.
So have the program directions been finalised?
No, Senator.
Why not? What does that mean?
So the program directions were so this is the subordinate legislation that was consulted on last year. So an exposure draft of those program directions has been made public. They are subject to final government decisions before they'll be registered, and that's tied up with the budget treatment that we spoke about just before.
Okay. Have you looked at the price caps for the capital cities?
I have.
Yeah. So are you aware that Help to Buy works for 14% of the houses in Sydney?
I wasn't aware of that particular number. Is that houses or dwellings
Houses.
that you're citing there?
Houses.
Right.
Houses. Adelaide 6% and Perth 7%. So it's not a very broad-based scheme, is it? So I guess my question is, did you provide any input into the... Do you provide support to Minister O'Neill's media release, social media bizzo? Do you help with that?
I don't, no.
Does Treasury give any advice to the Minister's office about that?
About her social media posts, Senator?
Yeah.
No, we don't.
That's all done inside the political office?
Yes.
Okay, because the Minister has been doing social media posts about Help to Buy... sorry? About Help to Buy being able to help people with houses.
Yes.
So
that is the aim of the project.
I understand
program.
that it's 14% of houses in Sydney, 6% of houses in Adelaide,
I think if you had a
and 7% in Perth.
If you had a dwellings figure, it would be different.
But she's talking
And-
about how I'm using that I'm being quite precise for a change, and I'm saying that the Minister is using the phrase house. And what I'm saying to you is, I would have thought 14% of houses in Sydney, 6% of houses in Adelaide, and 7% of houses in Perth is not many houses.
Senator, if I can, I'm aware of a number of different analyses about the way that the property price caps interact with serviceability, and I think we've answered a few questions on notice before from you about this exact point.
Excellent questions, I'm sure, very probing.
Yes. So in SQ 24000344, we took a question on notice at that point. We noted that the exact proportion of dwellings or houses that would be available would depend on quite a lot of factors, which would be assumptions in the kind of analysis that would go into those 14% and 6% figures. So the size of the deposit made by the individual, their serviceability at a point in time, also interest rates at a point in time, which obviously moved recently. So all of those factors, and then fluctuations in property prices in all of these places, that mean that those are probably point-in-time estimates that will change over time.
Okay. But it sounds like Ms Anderson's answered my question, that the Minister's office makes up their own social media. They don't check it with the department necessarily.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's unusual or shocking to know that public servants don't, co-produce social media posts. But the average first home buyer buys a $600,000 home, and the property price caps for Help to Buy are well above that figure. So,
well, not in Sydney.
Well, that is the advice I have. This is a program, again, that you oppose, and have
That's right.
delayed.
That's right.
So the scheme, we believe, will help 40,000 Australian households to purchase a new or existing home. 40,000. That's
Yeah.
pretty significant. 10,000 a year.
Got a couple more housing.
And we look forward to telling you how successful it is.
Well, I mean, I just say, I don't like to editorialise because, I like to be efficient in my questioning, Minister, but it is,
How long have we been going?
I'm just, you're the government. We are scrutinising
This is-
your expenditure of public funds and how you're administering the department. So just because we don't agree with the policy doesn't mean we don't scrutinise it. I think that would be a dangerous test in a democracy like Australia. I just wanted to ask you about...
And as you know, there are different price caps depending on where you are,
Yeah.
recognising the difference in the market. So, for example, New South Wales capital city,
Sydney, yeah.
$900,000 price cap
Yep.
for your first. And when you've got that as the average first home buyer buying a $600,000 home, I think that reflects the Sydney market and probably a first home buyer who is interested in Help to Buy, a shared equity scheme, which again will be a particular cohort of people, and then the price caps reflect, other markets.
So-
In the ACT, it's 750,000. Tasmania capital 600,000.
But it's not a solution for houses. That's my point.
Well, I think if you're a person that's your only way into housing, not everyone
But
is like
it's the
Mr. Dutton with
percentages.
35 houses, a shopping
It's the
centre
percentages.
and childcare centres in their property portfolio. People, for a person who's trying to get into the housing market, this might be the only avenue in for them.
You're going to make
And
the same comments about your colleagues
and
who
it
have
will
many houses?
It will be incredibly helpful to them. Well, you're dismissing the fact that
No, I'm scrutinising your policy. You're a minister in the government. I'm scrutinising
and
your
I'm
policy.
answering your question.
And you're making political comments.
All right, we've been going for 22,
I've almost finished.
Says Andrew
22
Bragg.
minutes in
Almost
this, in
finished.
this block.
I've almost finished. Can I just ask about build
Senator
to rent?
Smith looks keen to ask a couple of questions.
I've almost
Senator
finished.
Bragg.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you. Just briefly, because the Chair is very generous, I just wanted to ask you about build to rent. I think you passed legislation now through the Parliament. So who is this tax concession targeted at?
So, Senator, we can answer some of your questions, but the area of the department responsible is Revenue Group, who's appearing later tonight, but I'm sure Mr Donovan could help
my
with
question
the
is-
top-line questions.
What type of investor are you targeting with your Labor Party build to rent plan?
So the build-to-rent tax incentives target predominantly foreign investors who are investing using a managed investment trust in Australia
They've got to be foreign, yeah?
to receive the concession on the withholding tax rate, but not to receive the benefit of accelerated depreciation. So taking the allowable depreciation rate from 2.5% to 4%. And there may be other investors who invest alongside them in Australia who will benefit from the additional inflows of capital.
The new tax concession is targeted at foreign investors though, isn't it?
So there are two tax concessions that work alongside each other.
The withholding
One is
rate.
targeted at foreign investors and the other is targeted at all investors.
And so could any foreign investor, like a sovereign wealth fund or a foreign government, access that concession?
So, Senator, I think the engagement from our colleagues in Revenue Group who've led this measure has been predominantly with sort of pension funds overseas, so Canadian pension funds who are likely to be a source of quite patient capital, the type of capital that invests long-term in these types of residential real estate assets. Those are seen to be the most likely investor types to use this particular incentive.
Okay, so it could be any foreign government, effectively.
Senator, the usual rules around foreign investment and including assessment by the Foreign Investment Review Board would still apply.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Smith.
Thank you very much. At a high level, if an official in the Treasury makes a complaint, how is that complaint registered? It might be a formal complaint or an informal complaint. Is there a complaints mechanism or complaints process that Treasury officials can utilise?
So, Senator, I would differentiate probably between two main avenues, and I'll see if our CPO wants to come and join us as well. But the first is a public interest disclosure, which is handled very cautiously and carefully by approved people within the department. So that can be about a range of different issues, and that would be handled in accordance with the relevant Act. Then there are HR type complaints, which usually go to code of conduct breaches, those sorts of things. So they're the main two sort of avenues for a complaint, but the main way for a person to submit those would be to particular, if it's a public interest disclosure, to particular people in the department. I'm one of those, and there are other people in my team also who are authorised people. If it was around a code of conduct issue, usually that is handled through our Chief People Officer or her staff in our People and Organisational Strategy branch. And depending on the seriousness and severity of the issue, that would be handled accordingly with relevant people involved.
So if an official had a concern with the application of the APS Code of Conduct, that would go to the Chief People Officer first?
It depends who it's about. There's different requirements for senior executive service officers. I should have also mentioned a third avenue, which is the NAC, the National Anti-Corruption Commission for Serious and Systemic Complaints. So they can go directly there. I believe there'll be ombudsman and other. It entirely depends on the circumstance and the nature of the complaint. But for a complaint relating to the code of conduct for a non-SES employee, usually that would be anyone in our Chief People Officer's branch or her staff, and obviously anyone in her reporting line upwards as well. I think we have a requirement to inform the APSC if we're dealing with a complaint relating to a senior executive service officer, but we still handle the complaint unless there are any conflicts involved in doing so.
So what is the data that is collated, and how is it reported? I'm assuming that there are probably various categories of matters that if someone raises a concern, it will go into category A, B, C, D. What are those categories? If there are categories, and how is that information collated annually or biannually, and how is that information reported?
Senator, I'll pass to Ms Riley, our Chief People Officer. I would also add, though, that there are privacy issues involved here. It's certainly not something we kind of report on in the department. Obviously, the statistics are a different thing to the individual circumstances, but I'm sure Ms Riley can add to my answer with how we, I guess, triage and report. And
we don't categorise particular complaints. All complaints are taken seriously, and we do look at dealing with those complaints at the lowest possible level. In relation to reporting them, we do have a case management reporting system that we can pull data from, but they're not categorised in relation to triaging a particular complaint.
I can understand that they're not categorised in regards to triaging at the beginning of the process, but at the end of the process you might be interested to understand where there might be systemic issues or one-off sorts of matters. So do you characterise them at the end of the process or after 6 months or 12 months? Because it would be in your interest to have an understanding of what sort of cultural issues may or may not be appearing across.
I'd say that's correct. And what we try and do is we try and look at, from a learning perspective, some things, what worked well, what didn't work well, what could we do differently. So we do look at that in depth from I suppose an understanding of where there's some hotspots, and we do use data in relation to our census data to understand potentially if there's hotspots in the organisation around behaviours that are not in alignment with our APS Code of Conduct.
What proportion of Treasury officials might be engaging in, might be experiencing an election context for the first time?
I don't think we have data that would give an accurate. I can give an anecdata answer if you like.
Anecdata.
I think yes.
Oh, is that a Treasury word?
Well, it is when I'm not quite confident in the number, Senator. We won't have a system that will give you an exact answer to that, but usually our graduate cohort is our biggest intake every year. We would have had 3 of those, I believe, since the last election. A majority of those graduates would not have been in the public service before. A few would have been. So that's, 150 odd people. And then obviously we do have lateral recruits from outside the department as well who would have come on over that time. So I think it's a relatively small proportion, but it would run to the into the hundreds, I would expect.
Does the Chief People Officer and her team, as a general course of preparations for the election and the caretaker period more specifically, email Treasury officials about their various obligations leading into and during an election?
So
environment?
it isn't actually our Chief People Officer area. We have a different area, our governance area is responsible for, I guess, being the mailbox, for example, for caretaker questions when we're in caretaker. That area has also prepared some internal advice that was distributed by Mr Seaback, who's at the table here but was acting in my position for a short period in January. That was distributed to staff. So generally we will send out messages in advance of caretaker reminding people of their obligations, pointing to the PM&C guidance on the caretaker conventions and requesting that people who have questions about the caretaker period to come in through our governance branch in order to ask those questions. And then for complex questions, we seek the support of the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet.
Great. Okay, so it's the governance branch.
That's right.
Right. So how many emails have been distributed to Treasury officials thus far, alerting to the fact that we are entering a pre-election context? There are very clear caretaker conventions to be observed, etc. How many emails have been sent thus far, and to who?
So, Senator, I will need to take that on notice. I'm aware of one, but there may have been quite a few. We do sort of cascading messages, so I think, so I will introduce our Chief Operating Officer, Fiona McSpearin, who is 3 weeks into her role, so this is a great welcome for her. And I think you may have also sent out some correspondence as well.
That's correct. Fiona McSpearin, Chief Operating Officer, Corporate Division. That's correct. I have, since starting 3 weeks ago, I have actually sent out some points, some reminders about the APS values and the APS Code of Conduct, our requirements as Australian public servants to remain impartial, some reminders on our social media policy and handling around that, and that email went to our SES cohort within Treasury. And it was to provide just some helpful practical points that our senior leadership team can use in talking to their teams.
So is it the first of a number of emails to remind?
I'm aware of 2 emails having gone out. So since I commenced Senator, I've sent 1 email to our SES cohort, but my understanding is that perhaps some months ago there may have been an email that my colleague, Mr Seaback...
Can you make those emails? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So Anthony Seaback, First Assistant Secretary, Small and Family Business Division. In mid-January, I was acting for Miss Anderson. Sent out an email to SES staff as an early alert to advise them to think carefully about any upcoming caretaker arrangements and to cascade that down to their staff in the organisation. I also sent an email to portfolio agency heads and to the COOs in those agencies.
Sorry, the COOs?
Chief Operating Officers in those agencies or equivalents. Advising...
Is COO the plural of COOs?
I'll take your word for it, Senator.
No, you can take it on notice.
I'll take it on notice. Advising the same, but also offering the assistance of the department should they want to talk through any of those guidelines.
So, excuse my ignorance, but how many individuals comprise the SES?
So it's there's obviously different ways to count, but around 114, I want to say.
Yes. So the in terms of active SES. Number of people being paid as senior executive service employees at this point, it's 101. We have an ASL, I think 113 is the headcount number, but some of those SES officers are on leave arrangements, that sort of thing. So yeah, 101 is the working figure.
Can you please make those 2 pieces of communication available to the committee?
I'll take that on notice, Senator. We just need to...
Are there any other communication pieces being prepared?
So, Senator, usually we would, at the beginning of the caretaker period, speak with our staff as well and remind them of their obligations. So I wouldn't say there's a forward program sort of locked in, but obviously there's a timing uncertainty to that, but we would expect to be talking to staff fairly constantly at meetings and things that we have of a corporate nature over the next few weeks and months, unless and until an election is called. And then during an election, obviously, the caretaker conventions commence, and those sort of processes of elevating questions into the governance branch will begin.
So the mailbox that you referred to is specifically in regards to APS Code of Conduct matters as they relate to election preparations and the conduct of the election?
No,
it's
sorry. The mailbox we were referring to is caretaker questions, so it's more like if there is a question from a staff member about whether they should or shouldn't be doing a certain thing during caretaker, they can email this inbox and receive advice. The other one is the CPO mentioned was related to Code of Conduct complaints.
Is it anonymous?
The Code of Conduct...
The mailbox?
The caretaker mailbox is not anonymous. It's a kind of a business inbox. It depends what you mean by anonymous, because I think if people are using their Treasury address and sending it to another Treasury address, people will be able to access that, but not everybody is able to access that.
Is there an expectation in the governance section that if Mr Dean Smith, Treasury official, sends an email to the mailbox, yes, it says Mr Dean Smith, Treasury official, and here's his email, but the fact that Mr Dean Smith has made an inquiry would remain confidential to one or two people, and the query itself, rather than who has asked the query, would be dealt with rather than. Do you see what I'm saying? The distinction.
Yes, I see what you're saying. I think we're sort of conflating the purpose of the caretaker kind of inbox, which is not something which we would necessarily keep confidential because it's about people's work. If someone had a complaint about someone doing the wrong thing in caretaker or before caretaker or whenever, that would actually be a complaint that should be handled through the people branch. So, and that would have the usual attendance sort of protections for people that would apply. So I think there's two different sort of processes we're talking here.
Have complaints been made about Treasury officials and their conduct or activities in the pre-election period? Of course, we can't have any complaints because we're not yet in the caretaker, but have any questions?
Well, that would only reflect on the government that you were a member of as a previous caretaker.
No. The official said also the reference was actually the pre-caretaker convention. Questions people ask.
Yes, sorry, there is no pre-caretaker convention. It's
right.
We do things in advance of caretaker in order to prepare staff for their obligations.
So if someone had a concern today about activities that they were asked to do in their official Treasury capacity, that would go where?
So if they had a complaint, that would go to, most likely, a Code of Conduct issue. So that would go into the People and Organisational Strategy branch. But to be honest, Senator, people can take a complaint in a number of different ways. So we would not accept a complaint, or, if someone came to me in my office and made a private complaint, that would be dealt with. We would assess it and work out the best way to deal with it in the various ways I sort of described earlier.
So are you aware of any Treasury officials raising concerns about activities that have been asked to undertake that might be they might consider an overtly political nature, or might have some concern or doubt about the suitability of the work they're being asked to do in the context of the APS Code of Conduct?
I'm not aware of any such complaints, Senator.
I'm not aware of any either, Senator.
Great, thank you. Can I continue?
Senator Kubasik.
Deputy Secretary, I want to have a look at the counts of Australian businesses collected by the ABS, if I can. Specifically, I'd like to turn to Table 5, business by employment size, range quarterly data, and I believe this is the set that was released on the 11th of February 2025.
Yes, and I don't have that particular document in front of me, but between Mr Seaback and I, I'm sure we can assist you with your inquiries.
Okay, as at the 30th of September 2024, how many small businesses were there in Australia?
So I'll ask Mr Seaback to speak in a minute, but I did just want to indicate that small business definitions are quite complicated. So
I'm just after the ABS data, what they used in their data set.
All right.
So, yeah.
I'll ask Mr.
So according to them, how many, in that data set that I specified, how many small businesses were there as at the 30th of September 2024?
Thanks. I'll ask Mr. Seaback to assess.
Thank you.
I don't know if I have that table in front of me. So, so we are talking about the period. What period are you talking to, Senator?
So it's the quarterly data released on the 11th of February. So it's Table 5, business by employment size range. It's the quarterly data.
From the ABS.
I'm after as at 30th of September 2024, and then my next question will be 31st of December 2024. How many small businesses were there in Australia? So the first set, 30th of September 2024.
Oh, well, I don't have that that document in front of me, so I might, unless you are able to table it. I am aware of the ABS release count of Australian business entries and exits, which presumably is an aspect of that table. I can say that on the figures that I do have in front of me.
Sorry to interrupt, just to clarify, is there anybody here that does have that document that's able to table it?
Sorry, no, I don't have it with me.
What are you after? The ABS data?
Yeah, the Table 5, business by employment size range, the quarterly data for 30th of September 2024.
Yeah. I mean, ABS weren't called, as I understand it, to the committee. So Treasury don't represent ABS.
I'm aware of that, but I assumed that Treasury may have that data in relation to small businesses and how many there were.
Are on later if that's of assistance.
They are.
Senator Kadasik.
So just to clarify, Treasury don't have that information at hand.
Not at the table, no. Sorry, okay. Senator.
Thank you. All right. I'll go to my next set of questions. You have no data on small business counts whatsoever?
On counts?
Yeah.
I do have some data on small business counts.
Okay.
So, for example, and this was an extract of some of the material that the ABS produced in February, as you refer to. So I've got accounts by financial year from 2020-21 through to 2020.
I was after the quarterly data for 2024, so that's okay. I'll come back to that. That's fine. I'll then go to some counts on the annualised employment range that came through in August 2024 on the 27th. It's, again, if you have this, which is the ABS data table 13A, counts of Australian small businesses. Do you have that?
I have an extract of that in terms of number of small businesses.
Wonderful.
And number of small business non-employing, but not, yes, okay.
Sure.
Sorry, Senator, just, yeah.
Well, let's see how we go. Is it correct to say that there were 297,164 small business births in the financial year 24?
In that context, have to be careful how we define that, because there are different elements. Each of the births and exits have two elements to it. So my understanding is that when you combine both births and exits in the context of those figures, there is a sizable net increase.
So we wouldn't be combining births and exits. So I'm just interested in the births.
So number of births, let me just see. Just give me a second. Okay, so in 2023-24, there were a total, from our understanding of the figures, of 434,520 small businesses, including 297,164 business births.
Okay, so that was the answer to my question. 297,164 small business births in financial year 24, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Is it also correct to say that averaged out on a weekly basis or divided by 52, that gives 5,695, close to 5,700 small business births every week in financial year 24?
I'll take your advice on that. I don't have a calculator before me, but that's presumably correct.
Thank you. Can you confirm for me what the total number of small business exits were in financial year 24?
So there were a total of 360,710 small business exits, including 286,955 business cancellations.
Okay. So is it Treasury's assessment then that there were more small business exits than there were births in financial year 24?
Well, and this goes to my point around the two types of entries and exits. They shouldn't be looked at in a mutually exclusive way.
Well, I'm referencing births.
So if you take births
My
only...
question is it the Treasury's assessment that there were more small business exits than there were births in financial year 24?
Our view is that there were more business entries than there were business exits.
My question is not about entries, my question is about births.
But my point is that you can't look at them in a mutually exclusive way. If you want to understand from a statistical perspective whether there were more births than exits, then you need to look at both figures. And the statistics say that there were at least 70,000 new small businesses at the end of 2023-24 than there were at the start of it.
Okay, so basically if I look at births, there were more exits than births, but you're telling me I shouldn't just look at births, I should look at entries as a total figure. However, Minister Collins referenced births as a figure, so you're saying that she shouldn't have been referencing births at all? I
don't know to what statement you're referring to for Minister Collins, but if that's the case, that's the case. There are two types of entries, two types of exits, and you need to look at birth if you want to understand the net impact across the financial year.
Well, I have referenced births. So she has referenced births alone in her release on the 3rd of February in relation to the release of Australia's first national small business strategy. I've asked you a set of questions that would show that if we use births and exits, that there are more exits than births during that period, but you are telling me that I shouldn't use that data set because it's incorrect. So the very same set that the
Minister
Minister
It's not complete,
used...
Senator.
Sorry?
You're misquoting what I've said. I said it is not complete to look at those data sets in isolation. They need to be looked at together, both the entries and the two types of entries and exits, and the net impact of both is positive around 70,000 new businesses.
So I understand properly the entries, so the births are brand new businesses, like brand new babies. Entries could be, I was a sole trader and now I'm a company, is that correct?
That would be reclassification.
So it's not an entry?
It can be, I might just refer to my colleague down the end of the table.
Sorry, would you mind repeating that?
Yeah, so if I was a sole trader and then I became a company, as an example, would that be classified as an entry under this data set?
So Kylie Burke, Assistant Secretary, Small and Family Business Division. Depends on the size of what that sole trader turns into. So essentially, as Mr Seaback was saying, there's two different classifications for entries and two different classifications for exits. So the best way to think about that, as you said, is births or new registrations, and then there's also cancelled registrations. There's also resumption and hiatus of business activity. So they're sort of the two categories that make up those data sets.
So on that basis, are the births the best way to understand brand new businesses that have started in Australia?
That would be brand new businesses?
Yep.
Yes.
So if we're talking about brand new businesses in versus all businesses out,
so
that's okay to look at, that number, to get an understanding of how many small businesses, what the net effect is in Australia?
So births only is part of the entries of small businesses, so that's where you need to look at the two categories of entries and the two categories of exits to get the total number of changes in small business.
Okay, thank you. Are Treasury staff employed to work for AUSParliament?
Senator, AUSParliament is the Ombudsman himself is a statutory appointee and independent of Treasury.
I'm aware, yeah.
But the staff who work for Mr Bilson are Treasury employees.
Excellent. Does the Treasury share the concern of the Ombudsman that small business is in decline?
No, Senator, we would not characterise our comments in the same way. He obviously is an independent person and can characterise that how he wishes, and that's fine. I think we would look at a range of factors related to small business conditions and assess that as a whole. It's not usually something Treasury would do, saying it's in decline or it's in a flourishing period. I think there are some challenging circumstances. We would definitely agree with that, facing small businesses, and there have been for some time, especially post-COVID. But that's a matter for Mr Bilson.
Okay. Does the Treasury consider the Ombudsman to be correct when he said that sole traders are less likely now than at any point since records began 18 years ago to make the leap to employing their first employee?
I'd have to check with my colleagues if they have any comment on that. I'm not sure we have assessed that statement, so I think we'd have to take that on notice.
So the staff that you have there would not have assessed the statement from the Ombudsman?
They may have done so to support Mr Bilson, but there's a little bit of a separation in we don't tend to direct his staff. That they work to him and to the senior executive in his organisation.
But they would work under the same guidelines that they would work within the broader Treasury, right?
That's
right.
So
they wouldn't have any different way of counting than they would in Treasury itself?
Not necessarily, Senator. It's just a different hierarchy and a different sort of reporting line.
So the outcomes, one would expect that if the numbers were done in Treasury itself versus AUSParliament, they would be exactly the same? Not
necessarily, Senator. Okay. We may have undertaken them in a different way, so they don't need to consult us on every methodological initiative they undertake, but I would assume as Treasury employees they're undertaking that adequately and effectively.
They'd be working to the same standards?
That's right.
Correct. Okay, thank you.
Can I add? Actually, I might clarify a little bit. There are those Chinese walls, in a sense, between the Treasury staff working for the statutory authority or the statutory person. From a human resources perspective and those sorts of things, it's all one and the same thing, but we do. They are tasked differently.
I understand. It was more around the processes.
So they do not publish to the same data quality standards as Treasury proper.
Okay.
And I can go to the ABS counts of Australian businesses. It said small business end of June 2023 was 2.52 million. Small businesses end at June 2024, 2.59 million.
Thank you, Minister. And my my follow-up question in relation to AUSParliament is the Ombudsman said that only 3% of self-employed businesses became an employing business in 2023 to 2024, which is a record low rate. Does Treasury have any view or any data on that, particularly around the current operating environment for small businesses over the last 1, 2 to 3 years?
Thanks, Senator. I'll ask one of the team if they are happy to comment on that. Just in the meantime, I might just correct also something or clarify something I said before. The staff in Treasury who work in the AUSParliament are not representing a Treasury view. I'm not suggesting they're doing anything lesser or different, but they are not representing Treasury. They are supporting the AUSParliament himself, which is perfectly fine. But we can often have a different view or a different set of analysis that we undertake as well, and that's kind of normalised in our system. But in the meantime, does anyone want to take that question?
I'll try and add a few comments to fewer employing small businesses. So taking on board that ABS data, I'm assuming that's what the Ombudsman's referring to as well.
Yes.
So do acknowledge that in that latest release of ABS data, there are around 32,000 fewer employing small businesses. but that needs to be looked in its historical context as well. Over 21-22 financial years, which you would appreciate largely covers the pandemic period, there was a much larger than usual increase in the number of small employing businesses, up to 14% compared to 2% on average per annum. And much of this driven by businesses that reclassified from being non-employing to employing. The ADS.
So just so I understand, you're saying that the 21 to 22, the post-pandemic period.
Well, sort of from, let's just say roughly from 2020 to the end of the 2022 financial year.
I think I misheard you. I thought you said that that represented good business conditions.
Well, so the period coincides with the provision of JobKeeper during the COVID pandemic, and you can read what you would like into that.
What I'm reading into it is that we currently have less employing businesses that we did in the pandemic.
It's normalised since the pandemic.
Right.
So we're just saying the pandemic was an exceptional period. You have to be careful about the data simply because many people suspended collection of debts. You know, there was a range of factors that applied, including JobKeeper and other that were aimed to ensure small businesses were supported through the pandemic itself. And so from a data and statistical point of view, using that as a normal period is not something we would normally do in a range of different contexts in Treasury, not just the small business context.
I would suggest that a lot of businesses closed down during that period. They didn't open up.
Yeah.
No, but they claimed that they had employees.
So, yeah, where they had employees, yeah.
They claimed they had employees. Okay.
Cassie, just for your benefit and the benefit of everyone, we're running an hour behind calling Fiscal Group, which is next. You still have questions. Just wondering about how much time you think you need.
I think about another 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yeah, is that okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator.
I'll try and ask as quickly as I can. Deputy Secretary, I'd like to turn to something which we discussed at the last estimates hearing on this committee on the 6th of November, and a bit has happened since then, so I think it's worth revisiting. Are you able to tell me how many business insolvencies there were in the December quarter of last year? So that's December quarter 2024?
Yes, Senator, I'll ask my team to support me on this one, but I just wanted to clarify, are you happy to receive information about business-related personal insolvencies as well as corporate insolvencies? Obviously, small businesses fit under both of those categories, and that's a more accurate reflection of the full gamut of the types of small businesses. So we have AFCA data relating to business-related personal insolvencies and
I'd be interested in the ASIC data.
The ASIC data,
Yeah.
so that's related to corporate insolvencies.
Yeah.
Mr. Seaback or Ms. Burke, did you want to take?
Yeah, I can start off if you like. So if we focus on corporate insolvencies, the latest ASIC data indicates that the level of insolvency is above the immediate pandemic level and reached record highs in raw numbers.
I'm just after the number, thank you.
Yep.
I don't need the other information given we're behind.
Okay, well, in the calendar year to the end of 2024...
I was after the December quarter. My question was how many business insolvencies were there in the December quarter of last year?
I don't know if I have
Senator,
that quarterly.
we tend to carry financial year data or calendar year data because quarterly data is not necessarily reflective of the whole year. So we do have year data to the end of 24-25. We don't have quarterly data, and that's not something. I mean, we're very happy to take on a notice if you would like, but usually we aggregate that up. That's a more accurate indication across a year.
All right. Do you have an awareness then if the December quarter represented a record quarter for business insolvencies? Does anyone at Treasury have any awareness of that, or do we need to take that on notice too?
So we do have awareness of it, Senator, but I think as we talked about last time, in a level sense, something can be at a record high, but as a proportion of businesses, it cannot. I don't think we would have the latter calculated by quarter. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I
have
suspect
a financial year and
we have a
calendar
financial
year.
year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then how many were there in the calendar year then for 2024?
So for 2024, 13,451 corporate insolvencies And we are aware that provisionally there were 726 corporate insolvencies in January.
Okay. And then given we can't rely on quarterly data for records, was that a record for a calendar year?
I believe so, in terms of raw numbers.
So yes, so now we're into raw numbers. So yes, it was a record for a calendar year.
But all these things,
Businesses overall is growing.
it's contextual.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
I think the percentage is actually the more useful. You know, insolvencies is a proportion of companies.
So,
Probably.
and Minister, if I can add to that. So the level of corporate insolvencies, and I think we said this last time, Senator, the proportion of the level of corporate insolvencies as a proportion of total companies was 0.39% in the calendar year 2024. This is lower than the long-term historical average of 0.41%, and indeed 0.47% if we exclude the COVID period, where there were around 50% less corporate insolvencies given what occurred during those 2 years.
I think that gives you the best kind of assessment because it's year on year over a period of time. It doesn't give you the outcome that you're after, I accept that, but that is the actual facts.
I'm actually after the data from Treasury, who are the people that work really, really hard to put these numbers together, and I'm sure they brief yourself and the Minister, and hopefully, I think they probably do brief the Prime Minister, but he probably doesn't read it. But that's another matter altogether.
I don't think that's unnecessary.
Well,
I would imagine the Prime Minister reads the most papers out of everybody in this building.
Well, there was some interesting information about small businesses on Q&A on Monday
I accept it's not the narrative you're after, but if you look at the data, and I'm not denying that there's some small businesses that are doing it really tough, which is why we've been trying to get support to them, like our energy bill rebates, which you opposed, and, you know, to make sure that we are giving them a hand. But the data, when you look at it year on year, doesn't give you the answer you're after. As a proportion of companies, insolvencies under the Albanese government have averaged 0.26%, which is the lowest on record for any government.
Thank you. And I was after information from the experts rather than a political answer.
Well, no,
but I'll keep.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Senator Kovacic. I am appearing here as a minister at the table. I am able to add to answers or provide answers. That is essentially what estimates is about.
The data for January, was that the business insolvencies for January, was that a record for the month of January this year?
I wouldn't be able to tell you that. We'll take that on notice.
Okay. All right. Does Treasury share the view of Creditor Watch that insolvencies are at a record high and that will continue for the foreseeable future?
Sorry, what was your question?
Does Treasury share the view of Creditor Watch that insolvencies are at a record high and will be so for the foreseeable future?
So, Senator, I don't know that we have... was that a particular statement that they've made? I'm not sure.
Yes, correct, yes, yeah. On the 9th of February 2025, their CEO, Patrick Coghlan, said that given the depletion of buffers and higher sensitivity of small business revenues to the economic cycle, so small businesses would be particularly vulnerable to a further deterioration in economic conditions. And his words were that insolvencies are at a record high and will continue for the foreseeable future.
So, Senator, I don't know if we'd agree with that, but that's his language, and I don't think we'd do that on the spot. But obviously there are a range of different data and statistical releases that we watch, and that includes some of the things we've been talking about earlier with insolvencies and the like. So I don't think we would posit a view on what we see as the likely forward program. There are a range of likely forward trajectory for small businesses, but there are obviously a range of macroeconomic indicators and other things that Treasury watches very closely, and some of those actually are improving. So we would probably have something to say about that in in the macroeconomic space, which is not in my area.
Want to, before you continue, I actually want to correct. I actually misquoted. That wasn't Mr. Coghlan. That was the RBA. My mistake. So the RBA said, given the depletion of buffers and high sensitivity of small business revenues to the economic cycle, small businesses would be particularly vulnerable to a further deterioration in economic conditions.
Yes, and I'd like to see that in the broader context, but I wouldn't sort of sit here arguing with the RBA's view on that. They're entitled to their view, but we probably would prefer to develop our own view.
So you don't necessarily...
Well, I think it's fair to say for the banks...
Finished my
well, no, I can... you cannot direct who answers the question,
But I
Senator.
didn't finish asking the question.
Well, you put a proposition from the RBA and you said, do you agree with that? And I think the point the RBA was making was that in the event that the if the economy deteriorates, that will have an impact on small business. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, which is why it's been so pleasing that we haven't had any quarters of negative growth. We've seen employment maintained and unemployment low. We're seeing interest rates come down and we're seeing wages going up. That's actually a very good thing for the economy and for small business. But the government does not agree with the proposition that insolvencies are at a record high. As a proportion of businesses, the facts do not support that claim.
Chair, may I finish my question?
Senator Kavasic, and this would be your last question, Senator Kavasic.
My question was, do I get to finish my last question and another one, or do I just get to finish my last question that I didn't get to finish?
Just combine your questions.
Well, they're two
we're
different questions.
At that 10-minute block.
My question was, does the RBA does Treasury neither agree nor disagree with the RBA's position then?
Well, sorry, Senator, I find it very difficult to do either of those things without seeing the full context of that quote and the way in which it was delivered and the context in which it was delivered.
I think my last question is a very quick one. Yep.
Chair, could I just add, because for full context, Ms Bullock from the Reserve Bank has said specifically about insolvencies, if you take it as a proportion of the number of businesses which is growing over time, it's not at historical highs. And if you look at the trend of insolvencies over time, we're not even back to where we were trend-wise pre-pandemic. That is a full quote from Ms Bullock from Senate estimates last year.
Senator, are you concluded? Senator?
No, I had the last question.
Yeah, last question.
Yeah, go for it. Did you want to ask?
No, I'll go after you.
Thank you. It's been over 3 months, specifically 112 days since that last estimate, and we've seen multiple records broken with respect to the number of business insolvencies, the lowest ever conversion of sole traders to employing small businesses, and a decline in the number of employing small businesses in the Australian economy than there were 34 months ago, despite record inflation. Migration. So I want to understand, does Treasury have concerns about the impact on small businesses were inflation to rise again above its target band by the end of the year?
So, as the Minister has said, Senator, small businesses are vulnerable to economic conditions in some ways much more than large businesses and obviously individuals. So, while I wouldn't say we have concerns necessarily, I would agree with the proposition that small businesses are vulnerable to changes in the economy and downturns in the economy will affect small businesses in some ways disproportionately.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavasic. Senator Bragg.
I just want to ask you about advertising campaigns.
Yes, Senator?
Is that you? You get all the good jobs.
I get all the good jobs, yeah.
How much of the $40 million budgeted for Stage 3 tax has been spent?
Senator, I will start, and I think we've got a couple of people to assist. So the total spend, the 43 million, is that a correct figure, the 43? So I have here that we have a total spend of $22,406,459.84 against the administered item. I think it's worth noting that some funding from the Stage 3 tax cuts campaign was reallocated to a campaign which we call Supporting Australians. So there was some transferred money of around $12.9 million into that campaign.
Can you break the spend into creative advertising spend and the like? Is there a breakdown?
Yep, I'll ask Ms Moore to give you that breakdown.
So, Melanie Moore, Acting Assistant Secretary of the Public Information Branch. So, for tax cuts, the Holland Partners, which were the evaluation research company. Evaluation research company, $269,928.
$269,000 for creative?
For evaluation research.
Okay, right. Research and not creative? No.
Not creative. Where to, which were the developmental research agency, $386,995. Clemenger, which is the creative agency,
Yeah.
$1,956,811.
$1 million for creative. Right.
Think HQ, which is the public relations, is $344,031. Cultureverse, which is a multicultural communication specialist, was $498,471. 33 Creative, which was the First Nations communication specialist, was $297,487. And the Universal McCann, which is the advertising media spend, was $18,652,733.
And that's across the board for physical advertising, mass media, social media?
For Universal McCann?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the total media buy, so TV, radio, print, social, digital.
Is it physical as well, like bus stops and billboards, or is it?
Out of home, yes, there was some out of home.
It is. Okay. Okay. And how much has been spent on supporting Australians, or has that been subsumed, did you say, into state?
No, those figures were all the tax campaign.
Yeah.
So, do you want the breakdown for supporting Australians? Is that what you're asking? Similar to what
how much is the budget for that one?
The total spend is $9,197,784.75.
Yeah, and then the other one is Future Made. Does that have one as well?
That's right, yes.
How much is the budget for Future Made in Australia?
So the administered budget is $33.5 million.
$33 million. And what's the breakdown for that?
I'll ask Ms Moore to provide the breakdown for Future Made.
So current spend at the moment is $14,704,362.
Yeah.
The breakdown. So for developmental research, which was Ipsos, $781,585.
For research?
For developmental research.
What sort of research is it? It's very expensive research.
So the developmental research includes our initial formative research that we undertake with audiences to understand awareness, information gaps, information needs. They also undertake concept development testing. So when we go into the development of a campaign, we work with a creative agency to develop our concepts, and they are tested with that audience.
Okay, so does that include focus groups and that sort of stuff?
Sorry?
Focus groups and
Yes,
in-person testing of concepts?
Yes.
Okay. And then keep going?
Yep, so Holland Partners, which is the evaluation research, $116,612. Creative Development, which is Droga 5, $3,170,611. Horizon, which is the public relations, $551,372.
What do they do for you?
Public relations. So they are contracted to help disseminate sort of further information materials that don't form part of the advertising materials.
So this is earned media, is it?
Yes. So it's what they have done in terms of Future Made in Australia. They have developed fact sheets. They have developed animations to help further explain the initiative.
Okay. Yep.
They also develop our Ausland and Easy Read English fact sheets.
Okay.
Called Communication Specialist, Embrace Society, is $79,199. The First Nations Consultant is Cox Inall Ridgeway for $150,000. And Universal McCann for the advertising is 9,854,982.
Okay, and so 40 million, was it 19 million and then 27? Well, how much were the three campaigns? One was 40.
So tax cuts across the 2 financial years was provided 24.4.
24, yep, 0.4, yep.
Supporting Australians had 12.9 million. And Future Made in Australia had 33.5.
33.5. How much is left over of those three?
So at the moment, Senator, the tax cuts has concluded, but as I said before, some of the funding from that is now supporting the Supporting Australians campaign, and the FMIA campaign is underway. So it's an in-flight spend that we have for you, so I'm not sure there's left over.
Okay, so Supporting Australians and Future Made, there's still money to... There's still...
Well, those campaigns are continuing.
They continue, okay.
The Future Made one, it's on in right now.
When does the media buy period end for these two campaigns?
So Future Made in Australia will go until the 30th of June, and Supporting Australians will go till the 20th. The end of March. End of March. Let me just find the date.
Subject to any caretaker period.
Yeah. I mean, they stop in the event of an election being called and writs being issued, other than campaigns that there is agreement on for, you know, urgent health, usually vaccinations, things like that, that might continue. And I should say a lot of this is released in, this is all very transparent, it's released in the government advertising report, 23-24. Was released at the end of last year as an online.
Okay. So they pause during the caretaker period?
Yeah. Except for any agreed ones that should, you know, and they are usually health related. Health do a lot, like childhood immunisation, influenza, those types of programs where there is agreement reached, I think, between the health ministers, and, you know, there's agreement reached to allow the ones to continue that should continue.
Okay. All right, that's good. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, I do have a couple more, sorry. Just on that. What happens to the extra people Treasury hired during the caretaker period?
I'm sorry?
What happens to the extra people you've hired?
Oh, on the campaign?
Yeah.
So they would continue to support any business as usual sort of work in preparation for a return government, but should this be a ceasing program, or should the incoming government not wish to continue with the program, we would take steps to wind that team down. What would they do? There's plenty of things to do, Senator. I imagine most of those people, if they're not taken up with this work, would either take leave or support other activities in Treasury.
So I just wanted to make sure, so the temporary positions that were hired, how many of them were filled?
So, Senator, there were a mix of temporary and permanent positions because we moved some permanent people over to fill roles, but in a general sense, I think the team was funded until the end of this financial year.
Okay, so what do they do in the campaign? Not your campaign, what do they do during the caretaker period?
So they would obviously not work actively on the campaigns that are suspended during
so what
caretaker
do they do?
period. As I said, there's other things they can do.
There would be other duties.
Yep.
Like what?
Well, a range of different things, and there's also a good opportunity for some leave, Senator.
We would also, given we're not in the advertising market, we would also take the opportunity to do our own internal record keeping, auditing, make sure everything's up to date, ensuring that we can prepare, you know, any evaluations should we need to, and undertake them.
So would they go on paid leave or not?
Well, Senator,
if they took leave, they would have paid leave, presumably, if they had paid leave available. I don't know. Would you like an itemised?
I'm just wondering how many people we're talking about here, because these campaigns are not going to proceed during caretaker mode because they're not they're appropriate for that period. Then what do these people do? They've been hired by the Treasury. I don't think it's an unreasonable question.
Well, they will have other duties. There are significant
But that could mean anything.
administrative work in that area that would continue
Well, like what?
appropriately.
What's other
associated
administrative
with
work?
the campaign or other duties. I don't imagine it's all 100% on one campaign.
Well, how many people are we talking about here?
Senator, there are around 15 people at this
15
point
people?
in
It's quite a lot of
time.
people.
Some, APS employees. We also have the communications branch within my division, in corporate division, and some of the team from the public informations branch is already helping out with the communications branch work. It's similar skill set. So one of the arrangements would be that part of the team would naturally move across and help more with the communications branch team, and that's already starting to happen at this point in time.
15 people, a lot of people.
So, Senator, this is no different to any other area, though. Like, there are a range of things that cease during caretaker, like a legislation program, various things. So public servants are quite used to, during caretaker, busying themselves with the work that needs to be done.
So they're temporary positions, right?
Some of them are, Senator, not all of them.
They are temporarily funded. The individuals in them
Yes.
are a mix of temporary and permanent staff.
What do you mean they're temporarily funded?
The funding ends for these programs at the end of the financial year.
So they're not absorbed into other parts of Treasury. They're just there for that
They are there for that
hypothecated
period.
purpose.
Yeah.
It's a time-fixed investment.
Right. So then what you've got to manage is what do you do with these people during that caretaker period. But you're saying you don't think this is particularly remarkable.
I don't think so, Senator. There's a range of things that people work on.
Oh, here we go.
There's a range
Okay.
of things that people
Senator
work on.
Roberts,
Right, on that
live
note,
from Queensland.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
You just beamed in.
Thank you. This concludes the questions the committee has for the Small Business, Housing, Corporate and Law
You're free to go.
group. You go with our thanks, thank you. The committee now welcomes representatives from Treasury Fiscal Group, and we'll take a brief suspension as you come to the table. The committee resumes and we now welcome representatives from Treasury Fiscal Group. Welcome everyone, and we'll go straight to questions. We'll go to the Deputy Chair.
Hello.
How much do the announcements made by the government since MAEFO tally over the forward estimates?
Any in particular that you're interested in?
Well, total. What's the total? Announcements since MAEFO.
I think we did a lot of this in finance yesterday, which is probably where we would normally deal with it. We went through the decisions taken since MAEFO.
Yeah.
Do you want to repeat all that?
Well, I wasn't here, so...
Yeah, it's
tell
just
me?
probably the relevant committee
This is all my fault,
yesterday,
is it?
that's all.
Why do you blame me for everything bad?
I'm not blaming you, I'm just saying we've done it quite extensively. We'll of course update
Okay, well, what about...
we'll update all the decisions.
What about the $2
from
billion today
MAEFO
about Victoria's rails?
in the budget.
What about the Victorian rail thing? Was that in MAEFO?
That's in the budgets, yep.
It was already in there from the last budget
It's in
update.
the, yeah.
It just wasn't announced.
Well, there's a whole range of decisions
That's
that are
fine.
decisions
Just-
taken that aren't
we
announced.
don't know. We're just trying to work out. The whole point of this is to get answers to questions.
Yeah, and we did a lot of the decisions taken but not yet announced yesterday, or that had been announced yesterday, out of that bucket between MAEFO and now. So we could get that transcript for you, and in fact, we actually gave a table, Finance gave a table to Senator Hume listing them all that had been specially prepared. So we could probably try and find that, if that's helpful.
Okay, so I think the AFR is saying that the tally is 124 billion since MAEFO. Do you agree with that?
Well, I haven't seen that report. When was that? Try and bring it up
I
now.
think it was the last day, within the last 24 hours.
Yeah. Senator Damien White, Deputy Secretary, Fiscal Group. It's certainly not 123 since MAEFO, 123 billion since MAEFO, Senator.
Yeah.
Spending since MAEFO.
Yeah, I would be fine. I'm just trying to find politics.
Okay.
I think the big announcement since MAEFO has been the promise to increase bulk billing to 90% for all attendances by 2030. So that would be the single biggest announcement we've made. It's definitely not anywhere near the figure that you say that AFR has cited.
Do you have the spending as a share of the economy percentage
That's published in
for
the
25,
budget.
26? Not yet.
That would be in the MAEFO.
Yeah,
wouldn't
it's
it?
published in the MAEFO, Senator.
Published in MAEFO.
Okay, well, what is it?
You don't have it there. $334.
No, 333.
$333.
Give me a file, but I think connected.
Spending mode, payments. Which you wanted payments for 24, 25 or 25, 26?
25, 26.
27.2.
Okay, thank you.
That's when it peaks and then comes down in 26, 27, 27, 28.
Is this the highest spending seen outside of an economic crisis?
I seem to recall that spending. I'll get the correct figure up, but I think it was certainly higher under, over the 2019 to probably the 2020 to 2021 period. But I'd have to go back and have a look.
All right. So Ken Henry has said recently that the government has breached the Charter of Budget Honesty rules put in place by Peter Costello in 1998. So do you agree with what he says when he says, quote, "There is no plan to control government spending"?
No, I don't agree with him respectfully, and I have a lot of time for him. But I think when you look through the budgets that we have put together, we have seen a $200 billion turnaround across the forward estimates from the numbers we inherited. We've found savings in the order of $92 billion. We've banked the revenue, the 78% of revenue, so that we can pay down debt, which is much higher than the former government banked or even the Howard government. So we've taken on reform in NDIS and aged care as a way of managing some of those pressures into the medium term. So no, I do not agree with his analysis. And I would say anyone who's proposing to spend $600 billion on nuclear reactors doesn't really have a leg to stand on when it comes to government spending.
So what do you say to Dr. Henry when he says you might wonder what the government's long-term fiscal objective is? What is your fiscal objective over the long term?
Well, it's outlined in the budget papers in the fiscal strategy, and it's there, and it's was released as part of my EFO. It's very clear. Page 52.
Okay, so...
And you'll have seen that against that fiscal strategy, we have been meeting the requirements of it. Limiting growth in spending until gross debt as a share of GDP is on a downward trajectory, improving the efficiency, quality and sustainability of spending, focusing new spending on investments and reforms that build the capability of our people, the productive capacity of our economy and support action on climate change, delivering a tax system that funds government service in an efficient, fair and sustainable way. Okay. And allowing tax receipts and income support to respond in line with changes in the economy, and directing the majority of improvements in tax receipts to budget repair, which we have done.
Okay, so what about, since my EFO then, given the budget's in deficit, do those deficits get bigger as a result of judgments taken since my EFO?
There has been pressure in a couple of years, and they have been largely due to parameter variations.
Okay.
So do you know what those are? The automatic movements. So in Veterans Affairs, for example, because we've cleaned up the backlog, there's been a significant increase in the amount of veterans getting compensation payments. So they're not decisions of government per se, they actually just occur, and that's certainly where the pressure has been. But part of our work in resourcing the public service properly was to deal with those backlogs, but also in NDIS and aged care to deal with the reform work that needed to be done to ease the pressure off in the medium term.
Okay, so I guess the main question is then at 27.2% of GDP, is there any other comparable period, say for a economic crisis or a pandemic, that you see spending as a percentage of GDP to be so high? That's probably a question for the official. I understand you're entitled to answer it, but is there any equivalent year?
Senator, in recent years, spending to GDP has been quite volatile, both because of COVID and coming out of COVID. As we've gotten rid of COVID numbers, as we said, it goes to 27.2 and then it comes down. There are other years where it's above 27, but it's several decades ago.
So,
yeah, that was the number I was looking for.
So several decades ago.
So in the 1980s, Senator.
Yeah, so it's been quite a while.
And you've got to find room for $600 billion worth of nuclear reactors.
As you know, the job of the Senate estimates is to scrutinise the government, and that's what we're trying to do. Okay, well, I think that's all we have for fiscal.
Okay. Okay.
Very nice.
Thank you very much for appearing and answering
unexpected
our questions, but a few questions, and you go with our thanks. Thank you.
Get away.
And
that must be a record.
Committee welcomes
That's going to be hard to beat,
representatives.
ever.
Committee welcomes representatives from Treasury Markets Group, and we'll take a brief suspension while you come to the table.
So we're just waiting for some colleagues to clear security, so you're a bit
The committee now resumes with Treasury Markets Group, and if there's no opening remarks, we'll proceed straight to questions. The Deputy Chair.
Thanks. Now, it's now the 26th of February 2025, and I reckon at about 2 or 3 estimates hearings ago, when I was asking you about the government's plan to regulate crypto, I think I said at the time that I had no confidence that the government would ever deliver a bill on crypto. This is despite the Treasurer promising to do so after the FTX collapse. Now we're at the back end of this Parliament, about to have an election. That was a good prediction. You've got to be right sometimes. Even a broken clock is right occasionally. But my point is, and my question is, what on earth has happened here? The Treasurer of the country has promised that the Labor Party would regulate crypto to protect consumers, to give industry confidence, and you've had 3 years and nothing's happened. What on earth has happened?
Brenton Philp, Deputy Secretary for the Markets Group. So there is work that is ongoing in this space.
We know that, but what's happened?
Yep. Well, I'll ask Mr Kelly to take us through the detail of the work.
I just want to know what went wrong. Did it get lost in Jonesy's office? Did the dog eat the bill? What happened?
Well, I don't think we're saying anything's gone wrong, Senator, but if Mr Kelly could take us through what we're up to, that'd be...
Sure. Why don't you run me through it?
Thank you.
James Kelly, First Assistant Secretary, Digital Competition and Payments Division. So, Senator, I mean, where we're at is kind of in some ways the same answer as last time, which is
huge progress.
We're progressing the drafting of an exposure draft of the bill to give effect to the government's planned reforms.
The draft is done. The draft was done a long time ago, wasn't it?
The draft
bill.
No, we are in the process of the drafting process. Yes.
You haven't given a draft to the office?
No, Senator.
Okay, so you're telling me it's taken 3 years to draft a crypto bill?
I'm not saying that, Senator. So it's taken 3 years to go from various consultation processes and then kind of working up the instructions for OPC and then beginning to engage with OPC. Now, there are other priorities for government that affected
other priorities.
How early we've got to
Thank you for being honest.
The OPC drafter, but we're working on it now.
Okay. Thank you for your honesty, because clearly it's been deprioritised, hasn't it?
I don't think that's a fair analysis. I think the analysis is it's been a very busy legislative agenda area in that portfolio, working through a whole range of areas, including scams and all the rest of it. I mean, it's a huge amount of ledge that comes through the Senate in this portfolio. And there's been a lot of consultation done on this, on crypto, including with the industry and taking all of the feedback that's necessary.
So the Treasurer, Chalmers, said that the government would legislate a bill in this term. Is that a promise you're still sticking to?
Look, I haven't been advised otherwise.
Okay, so when will you pass the bill? Haven't got many weeks of Parliament left.
No, indeed. Well, the Senate, sometimes when it wants to get on with things, can deal with things pretty quickly.
You haven't even introduced a bill yet.
Well, and as we've said, we're working on it.
I mean, all I'd say is, these are deeply unserious answers to what is a very serious question that a lot of Australians would be expecting you to be able to keep to your word, that you said that you would protect consumers but also incentivise investment in Australia through digital assets. And we're now at the end of this term. I'm sure the Minister is sincere in maintaining the government's commitment, but we all know that there's no way that a bill will pass in this term. And so I guess I'm wondering what could be done to avoid this situation in future? How could the Treasury work with the Treasury Minister to ensure that your work isn't lost? Because I know that there are a lot of good people in Treasury who've worked very hard on this and they'd be very disappointed at the outcome. So how can this be avoided in future?
Sorry, you go.
Yeah. So, Senator, we do work closely with our Treasury ministers. Matters like this do progress. a lot of that work is done behind closed doors as drafting is made available. As the Minister mentioned, it is prioritised as part of the legislative drafting resources available to us and to the ministers to ensure that the important things go forward that are of importance to the government of the day. So in that context, we do work closely and we ensure that these things are progressing. It's not to say that this hasn't gone forward or hasn't been progressed. There is work being done. It's just that there isn't a draft legislation put forward.
So when did you seek legislative drafting status for this bill?
So, Senator, it has been in the kind of the legislative priorities process that Treasury's run. This has been kind of pretty. It's been on the list of things that are higher up the list rather than lower down. There's just been other matters ahead of it.
Does it have T status?
Sorry.
Does it have T status?
T status.
Yeah.
I think we'd have to check. That's probably dealt with.
Take a notice, and then we're getting into kind of question. Like we are getting into the issues of when the election is held, future sittings of Parliament, and in some ways I don't think there's any status attached to bills of spread, for example.
Okay, so in the absence of any legislation passing Parliament, the corporate regulator, which I think fancies itself as sort of a mini kind of Parliament, is now doing its best sort of deep state work by issuing various quasi regulatory guidance.
Who are you referring to here?
The deep state, known as deep state is very significant, as you know, in its breadth and depth.
I'm asking specifically who you are referring to here.
Your good friends at ASIC.
Right. So
they've now issued a piece of paper in the absence of.
I'm not sure that's an appropriate characterisation of ASIC.
Well, I'm not seeking to offend you, Minister.
At all. Well, I just feel the need to defend the corporate regulator from your derisory comments.
It's been one of your great themes of this Parliament.
What?
Defending the excellent work of ASIC.
Well, I'm proud to stand next to important public institutions, safeguard the public interest.
That's very laudable.
While others seek to tear them down?
Well, the job here is to expose wrongdoing and to identify where there could be improvements. And the point is, and the question is, what is now the result in the market's mind, do you think, of the Parliament failing to legislate anything at all in this Parliament, this term of Parliament, and instead the corporate regulator issuing a piece of paper saying what they think about crypto regulation with an info sheet? What do you think that...
Senator, as we discussed at the last estimates hearing, the government's reforms are targeted at those kind of digital assets that don't fall within the existing regulatory net, which is they're not in the financial product, financial services sort of space. That kind of line between what's in that net has always been, a bit of a open question, a lot of questions asked over the time, and the government's reforms always presupposed that it would be on ASIC to make clear what's within the financial services space already and which is already subject to their regulation. So that's a necessary part of the reforms going forward, and we're always expecting that ASIC would have to provide further guidance. In some ways, it's probably beneficial that they did that before we finalised the drafting of the bill.
Okay, let me ask you a dumb question then. Do you accept that if the Parliament fails to legislate a scheme, then the corporate cop or the regulator that is closest to that market's proximity is then going to be asked by market participants for legal, almost legal advice or advice on how they can run their businesses because there's no regulatory framework in this country? And therefore you end up having legislation through a grudge, almost enforcement approach, all through a regulator sort of making it up, even though it's not their role to make laws or policy.
Senator, I think, as a general rule, that there's probably merit in what you. There's probably merit in the proposition you put forward in this particular case.
Thank you.
It was the case, though, that ASIC was always going to have to go in there and be clearer about what that boundary is, because the bill, once introduced, was going to have to rely on that. The fact that they've done that
but there
now...
is no bill.
I said when the bill gets introduced, it will have to...
The magical bill we've never seen.
But the government's stated reforms are based on the fact that there is a set of things within the financial service regulatory space, and it's up for ASIC to make clear what those things are. So ASIC was always going to have to do this. From my point of view, it's actually advantageous in drafting the bill to make sure we get to the outcomes we want, that we're able to see that before the actual bill is completed.
This is killing investment. So what about on debanking? How many Treasury staff are working on debanking?
Lynn Kelly, First Assistant Secretary, Financial System Division. So we have a branch that covers a range of issues, including debanking. I'd have to take on notice how many specifically are dedicated to debanking, because our staff tend to cover a whole range of issues on banking.
Have you met with any banks or any affected stakeholders in relation to debanking concerns?
We meet with banks and stakeholders routinely. They do talk about a range of concerns in relation to the banking. None have specifically raised with me personally around debanking, but I would have to check that whether any had raised it with my team.
In 2022, there was the Council of Financial Regulators report into debanking. Has any progress been made on that?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last
There
bit of the question.
the Council of Financial Regulators report into debanking. Any progress there?
Yes.
So my recollection, Senator, and as Ms Kelly finds the right page in her notes, is that the majority of the recommendations made by the Council of Financial Regulators have been implemented. And these included things like more explicit guidance by the banks for customers who might be debanked, the collection of data and sharing that with the government and the like.
Yep. So there were a number of recommendations in that report. The government agreed to recommendations around the voluntary data collection on debanking to be undertaken with the 4 major banks. It also supported the recommendation that all the banks implement 5 transparency and fairness measures in relation to debanking. The government advised the major 4 banks of its expectations that they publish guidance on their risk tolerance and requirements to the digital currency exchange, fintech and remittance sectors. It also gave consideration to the fund capability uplift in the digital currency exchange, fintech and remittance sectors in the report. The government noted this recommendation and supported the objectives of the recommendation and recognised the potential that capability uplift may have.
So what has actually happened substantively on debanking in this Parliament?
So we've been working with the banks in relation to the CFR's recommendations to ensure their implementation.
Why are they saying to you that they're debanking people? Why are they so keen to debank crypto or digital asset businesses, do you think?
So
our evidence, Senator, isn't that we've had those conversations with the banks.
You haven't?
Well, I think Ms Kelly's evidence was this hasn't arisen in our conversations with the banks.
No, but I'd highlight...
because I think the industry expectation is there's got to be something done on debanking in Australia.
So the CFR report highlighted the main reasons for debanking in Australia were AML, CTF and anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism financing risks, sanctions compliance, corruption, modern slavery, reputational risks, fraud and scams. So they are the main reasons for debanking currently in Australia.
Okay, and has the government adopted a policy to address the mass debanking of these businesses?
So, for instance, there were amendments made through Parliament last year in relation to anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing to extend those high-risk services provided by tranche 2 entities. So that was led by AGD, that law, but that addresses some of the reasons for debanking in Australia.
Okay, so are you working with banks on implementing the CFR review, or did I mishear you?
So we've been working with banks in relation to the government's expectations around their implementation of the 5 transparency and fairness measures, and the government was clear to the 4 major banks on its expectations around their published guidance on their risk tolerances.
And is the expectation is they're supposed to tell businesses why they don't want to bank them, or what does it mean?
They're meant to set out their risk tolerance and their requirements so that entities understand how to fit within them.
Okay. And do you have any data or any information about how it's going?
not since the CFR's review was released in October 2022.
Okay. Can I just quickly ask about one more topic area? Do you want to take over? Okay. Just want to, it's similar then, conscious other people have questions. Just on payments.
Well, that's me. Yes,
That's you, yeah. So, you know that last year the Prime Minister announced that there was going to be a ban on debit card surcharging.
Yes.
How's that all going?
So I think, by recollection, the Prime Minister's announcement was a disposition to ban debit card surcharging, subject to the review by the Reserve Bank through its Payment Systems Board, and that review is ongoing.
So the RBA is still doing work on that?
Yes, they are.
Okay, and I assume you have considered that there are positives and negatives about blanket bans on surcharges?
We have, yes.
That's why the bank's doing the review.
But the Prime Minister's announced this. So it seems like
I think most people would like to see the issue of surcharging on debit cards dealt with. It's your money, whether it's, you know, $2 in your pocket or $2 on your card.
Okay, but it's already been announced, but at best it would commence in 2026, is that right?
That's the intention at the moment.
So it was announced in 2024 and it might commence in 2026.
Well, when the announcement was made, it was very clear that it was, you know, pending the finalisation of the review of being led by the RBA. I'm sure you can ask them some questions tomorrow about where that's up to.
If it was so urgent, were there other dates considered?
Well, that's really a matter for the bank because it needs to be informed by this review.
Yeah, and do you think that if surcharging goes, that then businesses would then increase their prices to subsume that cost?
Well, that's what the review is examining.
But you've already announced you're abolishing it.
What the review...
So are you going to consider some of these factors?
Yeah, that we have a disposition, and I think most people in the country would agree with that. I think it annoys the hell out of people when you use your debit card and you get big surcharges on it.
Okay, so
when it's actually cash.
So you're definitely banning it?
That is the decision we've taken, and it's going to be informed by the RBA review.
But it might not be across the board.
Well, we've made clear our area of focus, and the RBA is doing the work. Again, I'm not briefed on where that work is, but part of their work is to understand the impact of changing any surcharging arrangements and how you put consumers first and look after the interests of, you know, small business. Like, everyone accepts that there's costs, but getting an understanding of those costs and who pays is critical here.
Thank you. I'll go to you, Senator Barbara Pocock.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everyone. Bit of a marathon. My questions go to the Treasury reviews of the PwC and the consultants' inquiries. That scandal, as I'm sure you all remember, and the subsequent work done by the Finance and Public Admin Committee uncovered serious weaknesses in our regulatory framework for tax practitioners and the consultant sector more broadly. The government's released a response document announcing a range of reviews. Many have concluded and led to some legislative reform, and others are still current or have resulted in no change at this point. So I want to go to the outstanding reviews and the issues and get an update. And I'm going to page 6 of the Review of Tax Promoter Penalty Laws document, which lists all of the reviews there. There are 5 actually, that are in progress. So can you tell us where they're at, beginning with the TPB sanctions regime?
Of course, I'll ask Mr Dixon, who's leading our work
Thanks.
on that.
Mr Dixon.
Happy to oblige. And so a number of these reviews are going on across government. So some of these relate to responsibilities that are in the Market Conduct Division that I look after, and I should introduce myself, Tom Dixon, the First Assistant Secretary from Market Conduct Division. And some of those naturally then are progressed outside of our area. So I'll do my best to try and give you a summary of what's happening across government as best I can. and perhaps if I've got a list in front of me that I could just talk to. So there was a review of the use of confidentiality and conflict of interest arrangements across government agencies. Now, my understanding is that that review has been finalised, but with policy development continuing to progress. Examining the regulation of consulting, accounting and audit firms, so that's something that rests in my remit, and that was the subject of the inquiry that we previously had conversations through. And so in terms of that, feels strange telling you about your own PJC because you already know all of this, so apologies, but that report handed out its recommendations in November. We, as Treasury, have been looking at those recommendations. It's quite a comprehensive report, and now we're working our way through assisting the government with the next phase of that, which would be a consultation paper on specific options to address those issues. So we're working through that.
When would you expect that to be done?
So we are in the process of working with the government as to what options would be put out for public consultation. The timing, I'm afraid, is a matter for government on that one. In relation to the review of the sanctions available to the Tax Practitioner Board to discipline tax practitioners who have engaged in misconduct, so Treasury released a consultation paper to the public in 10 December 2023, and consultation closed on 2024. On that one, policy work is ongoing. It's not something that's happening within my division, but it is, I'm advised, policy work that is continuing to progress.
Slowly, not too fast, it seems.
Well,
that's quite a while.
As you mentioned, Senator, there's actually a long list of things that the department's been progressing. I haven't been given the liberty of running through all of the things that we have achieved, and it's a much longer list than the things that are outstanding. But to continue through the things that we're continuing to progress, so the review of the TPB's registration requirements for tax practitioners. So Treasury released a consultation paper to the public on the 17th of July 2024. Consultation on that closed in August 2024, and again, policy development is continuing on that work. The review of the promoter penalty laws, so that review involved a consultation paper that was released on the 4th of October 2024. That consultation closed on the 1st of November 2024, and so as you would expect, policy developments continue to progress on that. The review of the fraud and threats to the tax system, so that's partially been implemented through the 2024-25 budget measure, which is called Strengthening Tax Compliance - Australian Taxation Office Counter Fraud Strategy. Again, a consultation paper examining the gaps and challenges with the current framework is expected to be released in 2025, so this year for that. I've only got 4 more. So the 4 that I've got left on the list, so the review of the use of legal professional privilege. A policy discussion paper was released for public consultation just before Christmas on the 23rd of December 2024, and that'll inform a further options paper in 2025. And so naturally, that will be continuing. The date for the close of submissions on that first consultation paper is the 28th of February 2025, so end of this week. The review of the ATO compulsory information gathering powers. So Treasury released a consultation paper on the 3rd of May. That closed 31st of May last year, and we've been considering the stakeholder feedback on that submissions, and again, policy development is continuing to progress. The review of the tax secrecy provision exemptions, a policy discussion paper on that was released again just before Christmas on the 20th of December 2024. Similarly, that closes at the end of this week. So we'll have feedback to consider from that consultation. And then finally, where the Department of Finance is leading finance in consultation with AGD and other relevant departments, looking at solutions around the sharing of information, where contracts are terminated for a material breach, and finance has advised us that, again, that work is continuing to progress as well. So there's a whole range of things that are continuing to progress, and at the same time, there's a number of things that have been delivered, quite a substantial number. So it's an intensive work program, as you can see.
I do recognise it's a very big work program, but I do know there are people out there hoping that we'll just exhaust ourselves, governments will change, and none of this will actually be consolidated into the kind of really significant renovation we need. Minister, what's your view about that body of work and its chances of being completed in a timely way, even if there is, an election and you are returned? Do you feel strongly committed to making progress on it?
Absolutely. I think the work the Senate committee has done, with Deb and yourself, and it's been a real, I guess, a major focus of this term of the Parliament, and we have to press on with the reform works that's needed as a result of the investigations and what you've all uncovered.
Thank you. I wanted to go to the TPB sanctions regime just a little further to talk about that consultation process has been complete, I think, for a year of the actual sanctions regime, but we're still waiting for action on that, as I understand. What's the hold-up there?
So certainly, I think that would be something that's progressed by another group within Treasury. So my expectation would be that would likely be progressed in Revenue Group in consultation with our Law Division colleagues. So I'd be happy to take questions on notice.
Would you?
In fact, Revenue Group's on after. So
after.
You can direct that question after us.
Okay, thank you. Great, thanks for that. I then wanted to go to the whistleblower protections. And I understand that under section 1317 AK of the Treasury Laws Amendment Enhancing Whistleblower Protections Bill of 2018, it says that the Minister must cause a review to be undertaken of the operation of this part, and that's a review of whistleblower protections in the private and the tax sector. Subsection 2 says the review must be conducted as soon as practicable after the end of 5 years from the time that section commenced. So round about now. So my question is really to you, Minister. What's the current status of consultations on reform and that review?
So I'm actually able to answer that question. So whistleblowing is a part of the responsibilities in Market Conduct Division. And I can advise that we've actually commenced that review in the sense that we've established a team that is working now within Treasury. They've been undertaking research looking at the range of issues that have been raised in relation to the operation of whistleblowing laws, specifically focusing on those that are in the Treasury portfolio, because that's the remit of the statutory review that we're required to do. So that team has been then condensing those issues into a paper that we would expect to be released for public consultation at some point in the future. So we're in that process of synthesising those issues and putting it into a publicly digestible format so that we could solicit some feedback for the review.
And how do you see that review intersecting with other whistleblower reform processes?
So we engage very closely with other parts of government, AGD in particular, who have had an interest in looking at whistleblower laws that relate to the public sector. So we were, of course, involved by AGD in their process, and likewise we would involve them in ours. So we're very cognisant of that. We're also cognisant of suggestions that have been put forward that some form of a more comprehensive whistleblowing regime should be considered, and so we're trying to factor those considerations into our examination of what we're required to do. Of course, our remit is much narrower under the statutory review, but at the same time I think it's important that we are cognisant of all of those other developments and other suggestions that perhaps could result in a stronger whistleblowing regime. So yeah, we're open to ideas at this stage.
Great. It's incredibly important in all the significant events, the Banking Royal Commission. Every significant review in recent years has relied so much on whistleblowers. So thanks for all your work. It's really important that we get that follow through. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Askew.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for your time. My question is, it's a similar theme, I think, from what I've said and heard about delays in legislation being prepared. My question relates to recommendation 6 out of the Rare Cancers Inquiry last year, which was that as a matter of priority, the Australian Government legislate a complete ban on genetic discrimination in life insurance. And following on from that, the Government announced in September 2024 that it would introduce a total legislative ban on the use of genetic test results in life insurance underwriting in this parliamentary term. That was the announcement. However, last week I understand that Treasury released a further consultation document on the design of the legislation. So We're just wanting to understand what the reason is that there's been a failure to actually deliver the legislation as committed to by the government.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I'll ask Mr. Preston to talk in just a moment. One of the issues that we are grappling with there is the complexity of the ban and the potential inadvertent consequences that might arise from that. But I'll ask Mr. Preston to take us through those.
Sure. So, Rob Preston, Assistant Secretary, Insurance Task Force Branch. The policy decision the government took and was announced was a full ban, and the difference between the consultation process that we're doing now compared to the previous process we undertook was we're looking now at the practicalities around how we go through and enact that ban. So that's looking at issues around the medical accuracy, operational issues around how to ensure it can be implemented effectively by the insurance industry, clarity, particularly for consumers, medical practitioners, the genomic industry who have to engage with the bill, and then also a number of legislative design issues. So that gets to how we think about how tests can be volunteered, the definition of genetic test, how we grapple with existing contracts and so on. And I can unpack some of those complexities a bit more if that's useful. But
so just on that, those questions obviously are things that need to be considered, but the fact that it is announced as a total ban, it's not something that we're going to play around the edges. It's actually a straightforward total ban. I can't understand why you need to have quite that depth of consultation in regard to just getting the legislation prepared. You could have at least done it as a draft legislation exposure draft, perhaps, rather than just doing more consultation.
Well, the issues that I tried to outline there are the exact sorts of issues we would try to explore through an exposure draft process. The legislative prioritisation process, a bit similar to some other evidence already this afternoon, relates to essentially how quickly we can translate policy design issues into draft law and then law that can be introduced. So the leverage that prioritisation process was such that we couldn't progress to the exposure draft stage, and so we're trying to canvass those key issues through a process that we as a policy area can control.
So what's the timeline for the consultation?
It will close in 2 weeks from today.
And then what will happen, because we're likely to be going into a caretaker mode in the next few weeks, will then this continue, the development of the legislation still continue, because it was a bipartisan agreed support for both for the legislation and for the ban?
Yeah, so we've engaged with our governance area on this sort of work, given that caretaker is approaching, and there's no reason why we cannot continue to progress it. So we will review the feedback that we get and continue to work towards developing exposure draft legislation.
So what would the timeframe normally be for the development of that exposure draft?
I'm not sure that there's a normal timeframe when it comes to exposure draft legislation, at least in my experience, and that will ultimately get to the prioritisation process that governments control.
Okay, Minister, on that basis, assuming that you were to be re-elected, would your government commit to making it a key priority, because it was one of the commitments from September that it would actually be legislated in this term?
Yes, and I think I've answered questions in the chamber about this a couple of times. It is a priority, but getting it right is also a priority.
Okay, so hopefully we look forward to either way, whoever's in government after this election, that this will be something that's passed in a fairly short term. Thank you.
Can I ask a question on that one before we jump off that topic?
I'll just give Senator O'Neill that follow-up, and then we'll go to a break as scheduled.
So I'm really heartened to hear that. I know that there are so many stakeholders, and we do know that creating great legislation is a challenge that we have to do for the benefit of the country. Just about the genetic research and its evolution, I guess I'm aware that a handful of international jurisdictions have been able to implement bans in some form. This definitional question seems to have come up, so my question goes to that. Is there a definition from overseas that Treasury is exploring that could be easily used in the Australian context to achieve the government's and the opposition's policy objectives here in terms of health access and not having to go and get financial advice before you get a genetic test.
Sure. I think that, there are definitions that are in use overseas and they range in complexity and approach based on the context in which they're developed. So the consultation paper notes that fact, but also notes that the New Zealand definition, which is the most recent, is perhaps a reasonable starting place for adoption of a definition here, and seeks feedback on that. I'll just to add though, I think it's not just the definition is one of the things that we're working through. The policy intent of the measure was to try to reduce a barrier for people seeking genetic tests for fear that an adverse test might affect their insurance, and it was really focused on that issue around an adverse test. And in the work that we've done, actually defining an adverse test is medically very challenging. It would also be very challenging to implement from an insurance perspective. And so what the consultation paper instead points to is, given that complexity, having a broad ban seeking to, and that's preventing insurers from asking for genetic tests, but still enabling consumers to provide a genetic test that might be favourable to them. And so we've had to think about how we would then create safeguards around when and how a test could be volunteered to make sure it's not inadvertently volunteered. And we note that the approach that we're doing, that we're proposing, does put the onus on trying to think about whether the test will be favourable or not to a consumer. The onus of determining that is in their hands, given that insurers can't ask or prompt for a genetic test. So I'm delving into that issue just to try to unpack some of it's not just a definitional issue, but to achieve the policy intent, these are the sorts of things we're trying to work through as we get to draft law.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll take the break as scheduled. I don't have advice from the Deputy Chair about whether we're still with Markets Group. We're still with Markets Group, so we'll come back to you after the break. And we will return at 5:26. The committee resumes with Treasury Markets Group, and I go to you, Senator Smith.
Thank you very much. The Market Group looks after insurance matters.
We do, Senator.
Great. Can you detail for the committee what work Treasury has done on the issue of insurance affordability and availability?
We can. I'll ask Mr. Preston, who's been heading up the recent task force work, to take you through that work, Senator.
And the Insurance Affordability and Natural Hazards Task Force is a piece of work that you're responsible for or input to?
Yes, within Treasury. So the Insurance Affordability Natural Hazards Risk Reduction Task Force was set up within the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and that was to look at the range of factors that drive insurance affordability, and to look at a whole of government approach for how particularly risk reduction can lead to reducing insurance premiums. I think the key piece to recognise is that, as we've given in evidence to this committee in previous estimates, that rising natural hazard risk, partly related to climate change and also other important factors, are the key drivers of rising insurance premiums, and looking at mechanisms that can reduce that risk, mitigate that risk. So that's issues around in the Assistant Treasurer's press release relating to the establishment of that task force. So hazard risk reduction, community risk reduction measures, and then it gets to factors around how the built environment develops, where buildings are unable to occur. These are all, a lot of those drivers are in policy areas that sit outside the Treasury portfolio, and so that's why the overall task force sat inside the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet to try to look across the levers at government disposal to try to provide advice to government on this issue.
So my question was, what work has Treasury done?
So we've been providing advice to government on a range of issues relating to insurance affordability. We are participants on the Hazard Insurance Partnership, which has been gathering data from insurers and informing NEMA's risk reduction work. That's probably a very high-level summary.
We're at estimates, so I quite like to get into the details with that limited time that's available. So advice on various issues. What are the issues that Treasury has provided advice on?
One of the issues that was noted in the formation of the task force was near-term solutions regarding to insurance affordability, and we routinely provide advice on those sorts of issues anyway, but thinking about those sorts of policies that have been raised, things like the operation of the cyclone pool. So we've provided advice around the 48-hour rule, which relates to how long coverage in that pool relates to post-cyclone flooding. We've looked at policy issues around the use of that pool for other perils, so things like flood. We have looked at, we're aware of the role of taxes that get raised, for example, by the Insurance Council of Australia. We've looked at issues like issues around the ability for consumers to understand and compare products within the market to try to make sure that they can find the insurance most suitable to them. So that's a range of the issues that we've provided advice to government on.
So how is that advice provided? Is it a written document that a Treasury official takes to the task force discussion? Is it a written document that is circulated amongst other task force participants?
We provided, so the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet set up an interdepartmental committee, an IDC, and that met regularly. We shared information within that committee. We also provided advice, and other government departments engaging in that task force work provide advice directly to our ministers as well.
Yep. So since the creation of the task force, on notice, can you just provide me the dates of the meetings of the IDC that Treasury officials participated in?
I can take and
and which Treasury officials participated in those IDC meetings?
Yeah.
And can you also, on notice, provide me with an exhaustive list of all of the matters that the Treasury provided advice to the task force on?
I can take
which will include some of the ones you've just mentioned. So, what are from Treasury's perspective? What are the outputs of the task force thus far?
So the outputs of the task force are advice, internal policy advice to government on policy options for addressing insurance affordability and natural hazard risk reduction.
But Minister, I've not seen any outcomes. Have I missed something from the task force?
I think the evidence you've just been given is taking you through all of the work that has been done.
I'd call them inputs, say. So,
well, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. You can't just wander around the country saying that you're going to fix something without doing the work that's required.
So when was the task force created?
Was it?
It was, I was going to say following the budget in 2024 in May, but I don't have a precise date.
So are there any policy outcomes or policy initiatives that the government can point to from the task force?
Well, the government will continue to consider some of the work coming out of the task force. I mean, we recognise that insurance, particularly in some areas of the country where there are natural disasters, is really, a real pressure for households to maintain. I think the promises that were made under the cyclone reinsurance pool about premiums coming down by XX% have not been realised, and that was a promise under your government. And so we are doing the careful work to consider what can be done, including, and I would say this is an area where unfortunately not a lot was done under the former government in mitigation and managing some of the risks to households in those areas where their insurance premiums have risen off the back of natural disasters. So all of that work continues.
Will the government provide a response to the parliamentary inquiry chaired by Mr Molino into floods?
I don't have any advice on that. I imagine we routinely respond to committee reports. We think they're important, but I don't have an update for you on that. Sorry. I'll see if anyone...
Has Treasury provided any advice to ministers on a response to that parliamentary inquiry?
We have been working on the response to that inquiry, including with cross-departmental colleagues, reflecting the broad nature of the recommendations of that inquiry. We have not provided final advice to government on the shape of that response, but we have been engaging the minister's office on the directions of I'd say preliminary advice.
Has it been a topic of discussion at the IDC?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr Preston, in your earlier evidence you sort of mentioned that some of the matters that advice had been provided to related to the cyclone reinsurance pool. So my question is, has Treasury modelled expanding the reinsurance pool beyond cyclone reinsurance?
Yes.
When was that modelled?
That modelling was conducted last year.
Last year?
Yes. Yep.
At the beginning of last year? The middle of last year?
We did modelling at the beginning of... We arranged for modelling at the beginning of last year, and also there was 2 rounds of modelling at the beginning of last year, and then some... I'll have to take the dates on notice.
Were there external consultants involved in that modelling exercise?
Yes, there were. We contracted Finity Consulting.
Mm-hmm. The model was undertaken to expand the cyclone reinsurance pool to what other types of insurance?
We modelled expanding the cyclone insurance pool to cover particularly flood. We've provided this advice to government, and so the release of more substantive detail on the nature of that modelling would be a matter for government.
Will that modelling inform the final advice to government on its response to Mr. Molino's inquiry?
Yes, he had recommendations in relation to one of the many recommendations was in relation to that. So yes, it has informed advice on that.
At a high level, what did the modelling reveal?
Well, again, this is modelling that we provided that relate. Your question, Senator, partially relates to advice to government. I mean, I think to try to be helpful, I think the Actuaries Institute conducted some very useful work on a very similar matter that looked at the issues around expanding the cyclone pool to cover flood. And I think that one of the key observations in that report is that the flood as a peril is very different in nature from cyclone. Cyclones, you have some very high levels, to be sure, but there is also a large number of properties that face moderate and then small amounts of cyclone risk, whereas flood is very much concentrated in a very small number of properties. And so what that means is you don't have the ability to cross-subsidise within the flood population by bringing that peril into the pool. The cyclone pool essentially takes the margins that private reinsurers would otherwise charge onto for the coverage of the cyclone risk in the low and medium risk areas and provides the discount to high risk areas, and there's just not sufficient margin to deliver meaningful savings if you look at just bringing flood in and there being no external source of subsidy into a pool.
Was the modelling undertaken at a general level, or was the modelling undertaken by examining specific geographic areas? New South Wales, for example?
I'd say, Senator, the modelling was extensive.
Sorry?
The modelling was extensive and so well considered, but in terms of more substantive details, again, we've provided that advice to government, and I feel it's the role of government to release the substance of that modelling rather than going to the detailed estimates.
So the modelling has now been provided to government?
Yes.
Right. Obviously with advice about possible policy pathways and initiatives?
Yeah, yes.
Has the Treasury done any analysis on competition in the insurance market in Australia?
We have monitored competition within the market, but I would not say that...
Monitored?
Yeah, so we haven't...
That sounds like an ACCC answer to my question.
Well, sorry, can you just repeat your question, Senator?
Yeah, so has the Treasury undertaken any analysis of competition in the insurance market generally, and any analysis of competition in the automotive market, building insurance market?
I wouldn't say we've undertaken detailed competition analysis of those sub-markets, no.
But you have done analysis of the macro insurance market?
Well, I would say when we're thinking about insurance affordability issues, and going back to my previous evidence, one of the key drivers is often rising risk, and I think the home market is a good example. So in the last, APRA data shows in 4 out of the last 5 years, the premiums that have been collected have been insufficient to cover expenses. So it has been on an underwriting basis, making a loss. And so while competition is an important issue, where you have, I'd say those structural drivers are such that the insurance industry is in that line is making a loss, there is a limit to which greater competition can reduce affordability pressures.
Fair point. Yeah. So, to what proportionally, what proportion of responsibility for rising insurance costs can be attributed to reinsurance costs?
I don't
in Treasury's view,
I wouldn't have a figure. I wouldn't be able to offer a proportion. I would say that developments in the reinsurance market were an important feature of changes in pricing, particularly in sort of 21, 22, 23. Reinsurance, I'd say reinsurance rates have tapered in terms of how much they are driving affordability issues, particularly in relation to natural hazards. That said, as well as price, reinsurers have also changed how they engage with insurers in the market. They have increased, what technical term, their attachment points, which means insurers now have to wear more of the first piece of risk of any given disaster, and generally have limited the number of different disasters that they will cover in a given year. And so what that means is if you have a year where there's relatively benign weather, because insurers are bearing more of that risk, they will have a higher profit than previously. Whereas conversely, if it's a more particularly more frequent adverse weather in a given year, they will be more adversely affected because they're wearing more of the risk than they were previously.
But of course, population density matters as well in terms of insurance coverage and the extent to which an insurer might be liable for payouts.
Well, I mean, there are a range of factors that drive costs in the insurance market, and reinsurance is an important one, but it is but one.
So in the Secretary's statement this morning, in his opening statement, he says, we've also passed the peak in insurance inflation. Growth in insurance premiums moderated for house, home contents and motor vehicle insurance as a result of easing reinsurance replacement and repair costs. So that's a view that's been informed by your analysis?
That's informed by our analysis, and I'd say stakeholder engagement, analysis of various market research firms.
Thank you. That's on the insurance.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Just a couple of questions from me, and I think Senator Rennick was next. So in relation to your answers there to Senator Smith about the role of competition in the pricing of insurance, I think you talked about how fundamentally the pricing of insurance is about risk and how risk is spread and how risk is priced. Would a divestment strategy that potentially increased the number of players in the market, would that lead to lower risk, and therefore would it lead to better insurance prices?
Senator, I think we need to be a little careful after this morning's conversation about giving advice on some policies. But as Mr Preston outlined, some of the key drivers of pricing when it comes to insurance goes to the level of risk, the size of the pool that risk is shared across, but also the replacement value of the products that you're trying to cover as well. So as home prices go up, motor vehicle prices go up, that'll be reflected in your insurance premiums as well.
Just going back to Dr Kennedy's statement this morning, which Senator Smith also read out or referred to, that we've passed the peak in insurance inflation and growth in insurance premiums moderated for house, home contents and motor vehicle insurance as a result of easing of costs, which you've just described. Are you able to tell us more about those trends, I guess? So we've passed the peak in inflation in this area, and growth in premiums has moderated. That doesn't mean they've come down, it means that the growth has moderated. But what are you able to tell us about that trend?
Sure. I mean, I think the latest quarterly increase of 1.1% was the lowest since 2022, but it is still an increase. So I think it is, as the Secretary described, it's a moderation of growth. Going to some of the points I was making before about where sort of the market's at in terms of, I guess, measures of premiums earned versus payouts. The measure, it's called a combined operating ratio, is sitting at the latest data we have, it's sitting at 93%, and what that means is in the year to September 2024, the amount of expenses and claims paid out were 93% of premiums, and that's sitting at around about the level that we were seeing in the home market prior to those 4 years of losses that I was describing. And so that suggests to me that the increase in premiums that we've seen is bringing in the market back to a more of a point of balance. So that's how I sort of think in crude terms about the recent trends.
Yeah. The market is returning to a point of balance broadly. Thank you. Senator Rennick.
Hi guys, how are you going? I just would like to raise the issue of the Chair of ASIC raised this morning. He's going to start looking into dark pools. Is that something, how would you work with ASIC on dark pools on the AXX? Is that something...
Sorry, sir?
Dark pools.
Dark pools?
Yeah.
Private markets?
Yeah, private markets, but trading,
yes,
things like that. How would you interact with the AXX and ASIC on that?
So ASIC is one of our portfolio agencies that I've got responsible for. We often have conversations with ASIC about these types of things, including the Chair's view around private markets. Some of the issues that is raised as part of that discussion paper, where I understand he's looking to elicit conversation from the market to understand what are some of the concerns that are out there, what does it mean for transparency, what does it mean for liquidity and some of those other issues.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. No, I'm just curious to know how you interacted with ASIC on that, that's all. The other thing is, I know Senator Bragg raised issues before about Bitcoin and the proposed regulation for Bitcoin. I'm myself not a Bitcoiner, but I just find it a little bit hypocritical, because one of the things about Bitcoin was that it was supposed to be sort of free from, it's always the free traders that sort of push this stuff, and they're going out there, but now they suddenly want rules to protect them. Why should the government put in rules to protect people that use Bitcoin, given that it's pretty much...
Yeah, I'll ask Mr Kelly.
Yeah.
Senator, so like the regulations, or the regulatory reforms we're looking at aren't about regulating Bitcoin, but as you say, they go to platforms through which people trade or hold Bitcoin, so kind of custodial arrangements and digital wallets. So the earlier work we did a year or two ago, kind of looking at what regulations may be needed, pointed to those platforms as the kind of key area where very large losses that had happened, that had affected Australian investors in Bitcoin and other coins. And so that got to issues around fraud and security controls and the way they operated. So that's why we're looking to regulate that slice of the market that sits above the coins themselves.
Yeah, no, because I agree, it's a real cowboy market out there, but I just think you've got to be chasing your tail, because they're always coming up with new ways to, break things. I mean, Ethereum just got broken into a couple of days ago, and they cracked that code, which was, widely regarded as the next best coin after Bitcoin. But I just think when we've got a productivity crisis in this country, the last thing we need to be doing is having people, young men sitting around in basements trading digital assets when they could be out there actually. We need more what I'd call civil engineers, mechanical engineers, rather than financial engineers, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Anyway, I just think it's a creation of the market. And just one other thing. So obviously, we discussed insurance here today. Yet again, we've seen over the last 30 years since the state government insurance offices were privatised, that there's been a shrinking of competition in the sector, similar to banking, really. What's your view on I'll put this to you, Minister, what's your view on bringing back a government insurance office to provide a little bit more competition and integrity in the insurance market? And I'll just make this note as well, about 40 to 50% of insurance costs are actually reinsurance costs where money goes offshore.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
we were to provide, if the government itself, the federal government, was to underwrite itself and reinsure itself.
Well, we've sort of done that with the cyclone reinsurance pool.
Reinsurance pool goes somewhere.
A little bit like that, but it hasn't yet. I mean, there's been some reduction, but not the significant reductions that were spoken about under the former government. Look, I think the government would be reluctant to enter the insurance market more broadly, I would think. But we are waiting for all the advice to come from the insurance task force. We're aware it's a big price pressure on houses, particularly in your state, where there's a lot of natural disasters and people have been getting those increases in their premiums. But we want to look at what are practical and reasonable ways to ensure that people can remain insured.
Yeah.
And part of the government's role, really, I think if you talk to the insurers and councils, is to support some of the mitigation efforts, the flood levies and the roofs and doors being able to be locked down, and garage doors and things like that. Queensland has a program. I think the state government has a program that we've supported. That's actually where you can see significant reductions of 15% in some cases where you've actually been able to have that remediation work done.
Right. Okay. Cheers. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
I think I'll move to 5-minute blocks at this stage because I've had indications that people don't have a lot of questions. I'll go to Senator O'Neill, see how we go. Senator O'Neill.
Thank you. The recently passed SPF bill takes a whole of ecosystem approach to combating scams with the ability to designate future sectors. I've just got a couple of questions. I might sort of bundle up three of them together and give you a chance to respond. Why is a cross-sectoral approach so important? How will the SPF drive meaningful change across the digital ecosystem? And will the framework lift consumer protections, and how does it do that?
Thank you, Senator. I'll pass to the team that's been working on this. I mean, one of the important points to make out, though, with this is that scams are a ubiquitous problem that are not confined to one particular part of the sector. So a typical say investment scam may be on Facebook, so you've got a social media element of it. It might be perpetrating a bank, and it might affect somebody's investments. So there are multiple participants within the system, which makes it important to make sure they're all in the same place as part of the framework. But the team have been working on it. I'll ask to answer your three questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Shelley Davis. I'm Director in the Scams Task Force in Treasury. So I just sort of build on what Mr Philp has said, that typically a consumer who's target of a scam will encounter an experience across multiple sectors of the economy, and so the government has been building a framework that takes account of that pattern of scam behaviour and looks to improve the protections and obligations on industries across those various sectors so that there are better protections at every point through which a scammer might look to target an individual. Now, we'll have to ask you to repeat the next parts of your question, sorry.
So the ecosystem is the fact that they touch multiple points and they find whatever way they can get there. Any vehicle will do for them, right? So we've got to get up across that. How will the SPF drive meaningful change across the digital ecosystem? And will the framework lift consumer protections, and how does it do that?
The Scams Prevention Framework looks to increase the obligations across all of those sectors, and so in the digital sector specifically looks to set some mandatory obligations upon the sectors that are designated under the Scams Prevention Framework, and that will require the industries that are designated to meet some specific obligations that will be set out in codes, and they'll align with the principles that are set out in the legislation requiring entities to take reasonable steps to prevent, detect, disrupt and respond to victims of scams. And it will also provide some obligations around the reporting or the sharing of information about scam patterns and trends that can be shared across the ecosystem, so that patterns of scam behaviour that are observed in one part of the economy are able to be relayed back to other sectors that are also targeted, so that the intelligence opportunities increase right across the economy. What that means is that in terms of consumer protections, each of those sectors will have obligations to think about and to respond to scam patterns, and that consumers will benefit from that expanded information sharing across the economy, so that the intelligence that's generated in one part is able to help other parts of the economy respond and protect consumers. The other element that's established under the Scams Prevention Framework is a clearer pathway for consumers to seek redress where regulated entities have not met their obligations under the framework. So consumers will be able to approach regulated entities to move through internal dispute resolution, and the system will be complemented by the establishment of a single external dispute resolution party that government has indicated it intends to be the Australian Financial Complaints Authority to escalate or handle a matter through external dispute. Consumers will also have an opportunity, should they choose, to take action through the court process where they've been harmed from scams.
So there's a flexibility that it seems to be built into this, plus some certainties that you've described of options for people to better seek redress when they need to. Why is it important to have a degree of flexibility to allow the government to evolve, I suppose, alongside the scammers?
Yeah, so Senator, as you've sort of indicated, the scammers do evolve, and so the framework has been built to respond to that changing pattern of behaviour. What it allows is for the government to consider changing patterns and experience over time, and to be able to designate additional sectors or update codes to respond to changing patterns of behaviour. So the framework has that built-in design of being able to adapt and adjust to those changing patterns that are observed over time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll share the call. Senator McDonald.
Thanks, Chair. I want to turn back to the matter of insurance. Somebody made the comment, I'm sorry, I don't remember which official made the comment, that the cost of insurance was, what was the word that was used? Moderating, thank you. Have you taken into account, I was in Ingham after the floods a couple of times the last few weeks. In the Ingham Main Street, only 2 businesses were able to obtain flood insurance. So when you say the cost of insurance is moderating, have you modelled the number of businesses and homes that have been de-insured?
Yes, we also can ask Finity to conduct some modelling on availability of underinsurance. One of the issues with insurance statistics, unfortunately, is that we don't really have good enough coverage of the of like property by property level of insurance to then be able to compare and actually get a census of coverage of insurance. So and there is some work to try to advance that through the Hazard Insurance Partnership. So some of the work we engaged Finity on was to look into that issue. I'm not sure I can sort of share some of the work that was uncovered. As I said, it's been part of advice to government. And one thing, just to draw the link between moderating and what you would have observed in Ingham, that statistic I shared, that's an overall average level, yes. And there are clearly areas of the Australian insurance market where that are facing extreme affordability challenges and then are going without insurance. So just to make sure, I'm not trying to suggest that that the fact that the aggregate level, the growth has been moderating, hasn't changed some of those underlying fundamentals.
May I ask that, as you're doing that body of work to assess the underinsurance or non-insurance, that you pick a couple of those communities specifically in Northern Australia that have had events recently? I think that will be illuminating, particularly given that Main Street, some of those properties hadn't ever flooded before, and the last time that a couple of them that I was in was in the 1980s, so it's not like other places that flood more frequently. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Thank you very much. Mr Preston, in your earlier evidence, one of the, if I heard correctly, one of the pieces of advice that you had provided the task force was some information about better improving consumer access or consumer choice around insurance products. Did I hear you correctly?
That is one of the issues that we've provided advice on, yes.
Okay. So how do you reconcile that with Minister Jones' comment, I think in 2023, that the consumer data right wouldn't be extended to insurance matters?
I don't have policy responsibility for the consumer data right.
So did your advice to the task force about enhancing or improving consumer choices make any reference to the CDR?
No, it did not.
Thank you. I might just now turn to the CDR. Mr Kelly, can you give us an update on what work has taken place since the passage of the CDR legislation?
Certainly, Senator. I suppose, like, since the estimates, since we last discussed the estimates, the things that have happened is the when we were at estimates, we talked about the fact we just provided rules to the Minister to make regarding simplifying consents, removing barriers to banks receiving data through CDR, and reducing obligations on energy data holders. So they were made soon after estimates by the Minister. A few weeks after that, in late November, the Minister released, the Assistant Treasurer, I should say, released draft rules to expand CDR to non-bank lenders, so that went out for consultation. That also included a set of measures to reduce compliance costs of banks and non-bank lenders when they entered CDR, so that we're in a sense getting the cost-benefit side of the system right, and that those consultations closed by the end of that year. We also took, at the end of 2024, a range of pretty intense targeted consultations that went to making sure that simplifying how business consumers could use CDR. So there are kind of some frictions around relating to nominated representatives and who's the person who speaks for business and the kind of CDR consent and authorisation flow. The other thing that's happened in CDR, which is kind of not so much government, well, is kind of a decision of the government, is we've now appointed a new chair for the data standards body. So Dr. Ian Offerman is about to take on that role from the beginning of March. The kind of bit that's I haven't mentioned in that list is what have we done with the non-bank lending rules following the consultations. So they're just going through the very final legal checks within Treasury and hoping to have them up with the Minister by the end of the week.
By the end of the week. I thought the Treasury and the ministerial advisors had been telling stakeholders that they would be finalised in February.
So I'm not I can't speak for, I wasn't in those discussions, so I can't kind of speak to what was said. I think when we started the work, we were aiming for February, so we're a bit behind in getting the rules to the Minister, but we should get them to the Minister this week.
So you admit being being delayed in getting the final advice on the rules to the Minister?
Not so much the advice, but the actual rules themselves that can be made. Yes. So as we've been going through this process, we have been providing advice to the Minister, get his guidance on particular issues to inform the drafting of those rules, and the Minister has been giving us the guidance on that as we need it, and now we're at the point where it's just the kind of the final, making sure we've got everything exactly right, and then we send it up.
And they're going to the Minister by Friday or on Friday?
That's definitely my hope, Senator, and my expectation.
And the hope and expectation will be that the Minister will be diligent over the course of the weekend and sign them off and return them to Treasury before Sunday morning, in the event the Prime Minister chooses to call an election on Sunday? Because I think no. But to be fair, this has been a very drawn out process, and stakeholders have been constantly frustrated by constant delay in these CDR matters, so much so that the Senate itself had to put the CDR bill back on the legislative notice paper and then force a vote in the Senate to get us to the point where the final rules may, with hope, anticipation, go to the Minister on Friday, and then nothing will happen because an election may happen or may not happen.
Well, that's a big hypothetical.
No,
there.
so I think, well, Minister,
officers can't answer that.
Mr. Kelly has endured.
What happens if
I feel
this
sorry
happens?
for the Markets Division. I mean, I feel sorry for the Markets Division. There is for the Minister. What commitment will you give stakeholders that the rules will be signed off by Minister Jones prior to the calling of an election? Will you give stakeholders a commitment they will be signed off by the Minister?
Well, I'm not the Minister responsible. I think the evidence is that it will go to him on Friday, and you would expect that to be dealt with quickly.
So just to add to the Minister's answer, like it is on Treasury to get the rules to the Minister.
Yeah.
So in some ways, it's on us first.
Might help to set that timetable for Thursday, tomorrow, in order to make sure that the
if we can do it by tomorrow, Senator, we will.
So I think the Minister for Finance is sending a message to the Assistant Treasurer, Minister for Financial Services, that your expectation as a Cabinet Minister and a Senior Minister in the portfolio is that these will be signed off by Minister Jones quickly.
Well, as he deals with all of his briefs, he has not been given the brief yet, so why don't we let that happen? I'm sure he will deal with it as quickly as he's able to.
Is that your expectation, that as a senior member of the government,
I don't tell ministers how to do their job.
That he will deal with it quickly?
We are due to
I've
break.
answered the question.
We are due to break now. I just need to get an indication from the opposition whether they would have any further questions for the Markets Group after dinner. We are due to break now.
I'm just looking for a question. I'm just looking for an answer that gives CDR stakeholders great clarity.
Well, we've given you as much as you're going to get tonight. If
what
you
was
hold
that
people
answer?
over
What was that answer,
after dinner,
Minister?
you're going to get the same answer.
What was that answer?
That when it is provided to the Minister, I would expect, as he does with all of the matters that cross his desk, that he deals with that as soon as he is able to. I can't direct people, and it's hard when you haven't even seen what's gone to him.
Quickly. If you say the word quickly, just say the word quickly.
The committee will now break. The committee.
Can I put one on notice?
The committee. If you wish to put a question on notice, you can do so in writing, Senator O'Neill. The committee will break for dinner and return